Oak Hill Audiobooks presents an unabridged recording of Death at the Plague Museum, written by Leslie Kelly and read by Angela Ness. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Oak Hill Publishing Limited. Monday. Caged Birds. Chapter 1. The man fell, his hands clutching wildly at the air, grabbing at imaginary handholds like a desperate climber reverse mountaineering his way to earth. The jacket of his suit flapped as he fell, an ineffective parachute that did nothing to slow his inexorable journey toward the ground. As he passed the second-floor balcony, the screen went hazy for a second before another shot of the body appeared. Cameron Stuttle, Chief Executive of the Scottish Health Enforcement Partnership, paused the recording. The boys from IT edited the whole thing together. The museum's got CCTV on each floor, apart from the very top one. We thought it would be useful if the four of you from the health enforcement team saw his entire downward journey. From this angle, the camera was pointing at the man's face. Mona winced at his horrified expression, both fear and confusion writ large. She'd be replaying that image in her head, she knew, probably just as she was falling asleep tonight. At least she'd be able to put tonight's insomnia down to work, rather than her usual concerns about her love life or her mother's health. The screen went fuzzy again, and a third camera angle kicked in. This time the screen was empty, apart from a plastic model of something large and scientific. A foot appeared in the corner of the picture, rapidly followed by the rest of the body, which crashed at speed into the sculpture. "Oh," said Maitland, "that's gotta hurt. What was the thing he landed on?" "It's a 3D model of the H1N1 virus," said Bernard, his eyes tightly closed. "It's part of their standing exhibition. How come you know so much about it?" "I'm a member." Still without fully opening his eyes, he dug into his wallet and produced a small card. Mona took it from him and she and Maitland examined it. It proclaimed the bearer of the card to be a full member of the Edinburgh Museum of Plagues and Pandemics. The flip side highlighted the benefits of this, which included free access to all the exhibitions and a 10% discount in the cafe and shop. "Can we see it again?" John Patterson, the head team leader, was staring thoughtfully at the blank TV screen. "OK." Stuttle pressed a button, and the recording started again. "Once more with feeling. You might want to look away now, Bernard." Mona watched again as the man fell fearfully to his death through the central internal stairwell of the museum. Something about the whole recording unsettled her. Is it just me, or does he look mighty panicked for a man that's opted to end it all? Patterson nodded. "Yeah, he's flailing about a lot for a suicide. Don't jumpers just let themselves fall?" He frowned. "What makes you so sure this was intentional, Cameron? How do you know someone didn't tip him over the top?" "A couple of things. First of all, as far as we can make out, he was completely alone in the building. There's no evidence on any of the CCTV cameras of any movement other than his, and, like everywhere else these days, this building has secure green card technology. Nobody gets into the building without entering their green card in the machine." He paused, as if waiting for someone to challenge him. Satisfied that they were all in agreement on this, he carried on. "And secondly, he left a note of sorts." "Of sorts?" Maitland looked intrigued. "It's a little bit ambiguous. Could be a suicide note, or it could be a resignation letter." "From what? Was it his job?" "I'll come back to that in a minute. Bernard, did you have a question?" Bernard was sitting patiently with his hand raised. Maitland nudged her in the ribs. "Probably wants to know what was going on while he was too scared to look." "Shut up." She tried not to smile. Bernard looked put out, but kept going. "It's more of a comment, really. I think it's a strange place to choose to commit suicide." "Jumpers often choose somewhere that is significant to them," said Mona. Yeah, maybe he was also a member. Maitland smirked. Probably wanted one last 10% off at the shop. Check his bag for souvenirs. Bernard's cheeks were scarlet. That wasn't what I meant. I was trying to say that it was an odd place to choose to jump, because there's no guarantee that you would actually die. You'd end up horribly injured, but depending on where you landed, you might survive. A very valid point, Bernard, said Stuttle. If possible, it appeared that Bernard's cheeks turned even redder. Particularly as in this case the fall didn't immediately kill him, Stuttle explained. He'd probably have splattered if he'd landed on the marble floor at reception, but the plastic model thingy cushioned his fall. So what did kill him? We're not sure yet, said Stuttle. The pathologists are running some tests even as we speak, but the initial indications are that there was something in his bloodstream that shouldn't have been. Like poison? Cameron shrugged. Possibly. There was a small ripple of interest, which Patterson raised his hand to quell. Fascinating as this is, I don't see what it has to do with the Het. We search for people who have missed their monthly health check. If this guy's overdue for a health check, he's got a really, really good excuse for missing it. I'm aware of all that. Patterson still looked suspicious. This isn't one of those scenarios where you need some dirty work doing and you're intent on press ganging us into helping you. Mona's mind went back to her recent trip to London with Patterson to search for a missing professor. The words press gang and dirty work had all been entirely applicable to it. I'm hurt that you would think that of me, John, said Cameron, smiling. Let me explain. He was interrupted by a knock on the office door. Their heads all swivelled round to see Ian Jacobson from Police Scotland appear. Mona felt a wave of fury rising up from her feet. She tutted loudly and turned to glare at Stuttle, who was busy not catching her eye. Ian, perfect timing. I was just explaining to our Het colleagues about the unfortunate incident at the Pandemics Museum. Morning all. Ian smiled round at the company. Only Bernard smiled back, then looked slightly panicked when he realised none of his colleagues was extending similar pleasantries. I'm hoping that the Het and Police Scotland can work jointly on this. No way. Mona couldn't believe what she was hearing. Mona. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Stuttle, but I'd rather resign than work with Ian and his colleagues. A look passed between Stuttle and Patterson. Seriously, Gov, last time we worked together, I nearly got shot. It was Ian's turn to tut. Last time we worked together, I was under the impression I saved your life. Mona's jaw fell open at this flagrant rewriting of history. Mona! Stuttle's tone was at its most conciliatory. Just listen to what Ian has to say. I'm sure we can accommodate everyone. She was torn between continuing to make her point and having her curiosity satisfied about the body. She ended up not saying anything, which Ian took as a signal to start talking. I have to stress to you all that everything from today's meeting is confidential. Of course, Patterson responded for all of them. The gentleman that you just watched take a tumble was called Nathan McVie. I recognise that name, said Bernard. You should. He was head of pandemic policy for the Scottish Government, which made him probably the second most important civil servant with regards to the virus. Not, it has to be said, a particular fan of the Hets. He regarded them as largely window dressing, with limited actual impact on the virus. Always nice to meet a fan, said Patterson, but I still fail to see what this has to do with us. He's dead, not missing. True, and if that is all there was to it, I wouldn't be imposing on your time, but let me tell you about Mr. McVie's last day. At 10 a.m. last Friday, he turned up here for a meeting with the museum staff. No, they had no involvement in the meeting at all. The museum rents out conference spaces on the top floor, and McVie had booked one late on Thursday. although we are wondering why Mr. McVie couldn't find a meeting room anywhere in Victoria Quay, St Andrew's House, or any of the other Edinburgh buildings owned by the government. Anyway, 4 people attended the meeting: Mr. McVie, Carlotta Carmichael, MSP. He broke off in response to the low growl of dismay that was coming collectively from the head staff. The same Miss Carmichael who was recently spotted at the North Edinburgh Het office, complaining about the standards of housekeeping and threatening to establish an inspector of Het's post, if my sources are correct. Ian grinned. "Shut up and get on with it," said Patterson. "OK, so McVie, Miss Carmichael and 2 other civil servants were at the meeting: Jasper Connington, Director of Health for the Scottish Government, and Helen Sopel, Head of the Virus Operational Response Team. Still not seeing what this has to do with us. At 8:30 this morning, Helen Sopel failed to turn up for her monthly scheduled health check. As you can imagine, for someone in her position, missing a health check is unthinkable. She didn't turn up for work this morning, and her colleagues couldn't get an answer from her mobile. While her staff were wondering what they should do about her unexpected absence, her sister phoned looking for her. Apparently, she was worried, as Helen stood her up for a cinema trip on Sunday night. That's not good." "Quite so," Stuttle concurred. "The 4 most important people in virus policy in Scotland had a meeting here on Friday morning. At 11:30 p.m. on Friday night, one of them kills themselves, and at some point over the weekend, another one goes missing. Carlotta Carmichael was absolutely alive and well as of an hour ago, so don't get your hopes up, John." "Do we know what the meeting was about?" asked Bernard. "No, we don't, but we need to get Helen Sopel found and into a health check before anyone notices she's gone, because these are the people at the very top of virus policy. These are the people who are continually popping up on TV telling us that everything is under control. These are the people who are supposed to be making everything all right. If word gets out that they are going crazy, there's going to be panic on the streets." He looked round at them all. "There's going to be bloodshed." Chapter 2. Bernard pressed the on switch of his computer and wondered what to do next. The morning's video show had been horrific, and he was in full agreement with Stuttle that if so much as a sniff of the disarray at the head of the civil service was made public, there would be panic on the streets. He'd fully anticipated that the team would rush back to their offices for a debrief, with an immediate doling out of tasks by their team leader. But Patterson and Stuttle had excused themselves at the end of the meeting, with a muttered statement about a team leaders' meeting over at the Parliament. In a slightly louder tone, he'd made it clear that Mona was to take a lead on activity in his absence. Mona had risen to this challenge by heading off to the cafeteria in pursuit of coffee. "Seriously, Bernard, I'm worse than useless until I get some caffeine into me. You want one?" He declined the offer. He was trying to limit his consumption of coffee, ditto his intake of alcohol, takeaways, sugary snacks, and any other item that his subconscious might be driving him to regard as comfort food. He was definitely at risk of taking refuge in eating, because there certainly wasn't any refuge in bricks and mortar. Since he had split up, just about amicably, from his wife, he had a range of increasingly unfortunate living arrangements. A flat share with a beautician had started promisingly, but had lasted only a matter of weeks, brought to an abrupt end when a Het investigation resulted in his landlady getting her window put in, and a visit from a large and threatening thug. This had been followed by 5 nights sleeping on a very short sofa in his mother's sheltered housing flat, until one of the neighbours had complained about her harbouring a flatmate who clearly didn't meet the age restrictions. That had led desperately to his current living conditions. The best thing he could say about them was that at least they were ending. In fact, they were concluding that very evening when he picked up the keys to his new one-person flat. Until he was properly settled in his new home and back on an even keel, he was sticking to mineral water and eating his greens in a slightly doomed attempt to protect his mental health. Also, he was slightly ashamed to admit, to stop him getting fat. For the first time in his life, he was experiencing unwanted weight gain, noticing an increasing amount of flesh that could be termed love handles appearing. In his life before the Het, he had been a professional badminton player, training 3 hours a day, 6 days a week. He'd followed a strict, protein-rich diet, which he continued to keep to while he retrained in health promotion. But with every passing month at the Het, he'd fallen further into the world of fast food, snacks from the canteen, and chocolate bars from the corner shop. His slow, sauntering journey toward obesity had to stop. He couldn't get fat, especially not now that he was single. There was an outburst of expletives from the direction of Maitland's desk. His ire seemed to be directed at the contents of his email inbox. Bernard chose to ignore the ranting. In his experience of the other Het members, there did tend to be a great deal of swearing, much of which was directed at him. He'd been horrified when he'd first heard Mr. Patterson refer to a colleague from Shep as a bit of a C-word. He was largely able to screen it out now, although, like the junk food, he was doing his best to avoid developing a cursing habit himself. It was a slippery slope, from an occasional oath in the office to accidentally telling your mother to F off. He returned to his musings about singledom. He and his wife had split by mutual agreement. It wasn't like she'd kicked him out or anything, no matter what Maitland seemed to think, after 10 years of marriage. They'd lost their baby son to the virus, and the marriage had never really recovered, floundering on that difference of opinion about whether to have another child or not. And now, he was torn between making the best of things, moving on, maybe even signing up for one of the dating sites that his friends Marcus and Bryce had been talking about. The other half of his brain was thinking desperately of a way to reconcile with his wife, a difficult reconciliation given his reluctance to bring a child into a world filled with the virus, and her insistence on... A stapler crashed onto his keyboard. Startled, he swivelled round on his chair to confront the aggressor. "What are you playing at, Maitland? You could have hit me." "I was aiming for you. You haven't listened to a word I've said." "Yes, and check your emails. I've got one from HR that I don't understand. I must be reading it wrong. If it's got the phrase P45 in it, I think you're reading it just right." Maitland stood up and headed in his direction. Bernard spun hastily back toward his computer. "All right, I'll look." Maitland shoved him out of the way and double-clicked on one of his emails. "There, that one. It's been sent to every member of staff." He began to read aloud. "Due to the continuing challenges presented by the virus, we are invoking Clause 74 of your contract of employment. Please note that this may affect your annual leave, retirement, and severance plans." What does that mean? It's not going to be good, is it? I mean, they're not going to email us all and say they've improved our terms and conditions. Have you looked at what Clause 74 actually says? Of course not. It's not like I carry a copy of my contract around with me in case I need to cross-reference it against my incoming emails. Do you even know where your contract is? At home, probably. Or maybe I left it at Emma's flat when I moved out. Or it could be in a pile of stuff I left at my mum's. We'll need to get HR to send us new copies out. No, we won't. Bernard opened the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet and pulled out a ring binder. He flicked past his timesheets and expenses claims for the past 6 months, then found what he was looking for, neatly stored in a plastic pocket. "My contract, same as yours and, I assume, everyone else's." Maitland made a grab for it, but he managed to get it out of the way just in time. With his back to his colleague, he found the correct page. "Oh, this is bad." "What?" Maitland made a second, and this time successful, grab for the contract. "Clause 74. In the event of exceptional circumstances, the Scottish Health Enforcement Partnership has the right to insist that all staff are retained within the HETs in order to meet the requirements of the service. This could include cancellations of annual leave, delaying of retirement, and revoking the right of staff members to resign. He lowered the paper. Can they do that? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? The one solitary contribution that you make to this team is that you understand shit like this. That's not true. I mean, there must be some regulation or other that protects our rights. Bernard retrieved his, now crumpled, contract from his colleague, smoothed it out, and reread the offending clause. Did you have provisions like this in your police contract? I don't think so. I mean, there was something about the right to cancel annual leave, but nothing about having to work for the police for the rest of my life. It won't be for the rest of your life, just until the virus is under control. Maitland snorted and turned back to his seat. No time soon, then. Bernard read and reread the clause, his heart racing a little faster each time. The one thing that had made his life at the Het tolerable was the thought that after one too many taunts from Maitland, or Mr. Patterson, he could tell them where to go. In fact, he fantasised about it on a fairly regular basis. The cutting jibe he would make about Patterson's leadership style, the pleasure he would take in telling Maitland that the only good thing about him was his girlfriend. And now, he was trapped here. Hell is other people, particularly those with the letters H-E-T in their job title. Look who I found! Mona and her coffee cup appeared in the doorway, her arm around a middle-aged woman with an untidy mop of long brown hair. Carol! Maitland rushed over to embrace his Het partner. We've missed you. I've missed you too, she smiled, but Bernard thought it looked a little forced. He gave her a discreet once-over. Pale, he thought, her rosy-cheeked good health no longer shining through. There were stress lines around her eyes, and more grey in her hair than he remembered. Something in her stance conveyed a weariness with life that was a complete contrast to her former optimistic self. She seemed to have aged in the 6 weeks since he'd last seen her, not surprising given the events that had led up to her extended compassionate leave. How's the jaw? The jaw had received a booting from a suspected health defaulter, leaving Carol barely able to eat or talk. She made a show of chomping her teeth together. Full working order. And the boy? The boy, Carol's teenage son, had been an unwitting pawn in an attempt by a local drug dealer to get some traction over the Het. A pretty girl, drugs, and teenage bravado had combined to put young Michael in a compromised position. After a bit of nudging, Stuttle had agreed to 6 weeks' leave for Carol to get on top of the situation. He's okay. He's still down living with my cousin in Alnwick. We're thinking about trying to get him into school there, actually, which brings me to my visit today. She reached into her bag and produced an envelope. I'm afraid I'm not coming back. This is my resignation letter. Is Mr. Patterson in? Oh, Carol, you sure about this? Mona reached out to her. Maitland took several large steps backwards and poked Bernard's shoulder. He looked up, and Maitland made a nodding gesture in Carol's direction. Bernard interpreted this to mean that whoever was going to break the bad news to their colleague, it wasn't going to be Maitland. Carol, I don't think you can resign. Her face crumpled a little, and he thought for a moment she was going to cry. I know you don't want me to go, Bernard, and I'll miss all of you too, but I really have to put my family first. Mona put a comforting arm round Carol's shoulder. Of course you do, we understand. Bernard looked up at Maitland for help, who repeated his nodding gesture more vigorously than before. He sighed and prepared to try again. No, I mean, you really can't resign. We got an email this morning telling us that Shep's invoking a clause in our contract that means we can't leave. Carol's face contorted through a number of emotions. The denial and bargaining stages quickly rushed past before her features landed heavily on anger. You sure about this? Asked Mona. Check your emails if you don't believe me, or have a read of mine. Maitland rolled his chair out of the way and the two of them pushed in to the computer. "Where's Patterson?" Carol's voice had the low, measured tone of someone who was trying very hard not to completely lose it. "Him and Stuttle disappeared off to some meeting," said Maitland. "Pretty sure the meeting will be full of Het team leaders from across Scotland, hiding out until their staff have calmed down. This," Carol's voice was losing its controlled edge, "this is wrong. How can they do this?" "Carol," began Bernard, "please, see you're not about to tell me to calm down." He gave up. If unhelpful suggestions weren't to be allowed, he really had no other weapons in his armoury. "Because I do not feel calm. I feel furious. I've lost 2 teeth because of the Het. I had to relocate my son to England because of the Het. And now you are telling me I'm trapped here like a bird in a bloody cage. You're telling me I have to work for them for the rest of my life." "It won't be for the rest of your life, just until—" Maitland trod heavily on his foot, which he took as a sign to shut up. Carol glared at them all and turned on her heel. "Where are you going?" She snatched up her bag. "To get a lawyer." The three of them sat in silence until her footsteps disappeared. "When do you think the Gov will show his face?" asked Maitland. "I'm betting we don't see him before Wednesday." There was the sound of footsteps in the corridor. "Or he might be about to front it out." They watched the empty door frame until Ian Jacobson loomed into view. "Your colleague shot past me with a face like fury. What did I miss?" Chapter 3. "Are you going to crack a smile at any point today, Mona?" They were in Ian's car, en route to the Scottish Government's offices in Leith. "Probably not." "I still think this is a pretty poor way to treat someone who saved your life." She kept silent, refusing to rise to the bait. "Could have turned out very badly for you and Bertram Fowler if Bob and I hadn't ridden to the rescue." She leaned forward and turned the radio on. Ian tutted, but at least he'd stopped talking. A year ago, the name Professor Alexander Bertram Fowler would have meant very little to her. She'd probably have known that he was Scotland's leading virologist, with a long and distinguished career at one of Scotland's top universities. But as he led a largely private life, aside from popping up occasionally on the Scottish Evening News to discuss Ebola or swine flu or one of the many pandemics that never quite arrived, he'd have remained one of these half-familiar faces that you could never quite put a name to. But then the virus had struck, and as the go-to person for commenting on viral issues, he had been catapulted into something approaching celebrity. Maybe notoriety would be a better word, as the professor's approach to the virus had not won him many friends within the Scottish establishment. He was often at odds with official government policy and had gained a reputation for speaking truth to power. Not surprisingly, this had given him a large cult following amongst health professionals, trade unions, and young people. As a keen supporter of the health check regime, he was popular with the Het staff, but his open criticism of other aspects of virus policy had brought him some serious enemies. Mona's knowledge of the professor and his work had deepened significantly some weeks previously. Bertram Fowler had inexplicably disappeared, dangerously close to both his scheduled health check and an important speech he'd been due to give at the Scottish Parliament. Stuttle, a signed-up member of the Bertram Fowler fan club, had ordered Patterson to find him, and in turn, Patterson had ordered her to help. With the assistance of Teresa, the professor's extremely bossy secretary, they tracked him down to London, where he'd been looking for his estranged daughter. It transpired that tracking him down was the easy bit. Whatever the professor had been planning to discuss in his speech, it had alarmed someone so much that they'd spent most of their journey back to Scotland being tailed by a car on the M1. When they'd stopped at a service station, things had taken a turn for the murderous, as one of their unknown assailants had stalked them through the dark and attempted to shoot the professor. And the thing that had alarmed Mona most about the whole event was that the man who had taken the potshot knew her by name, a turn of events that no one at Shep had ever explained to her satisfaction. Annoyingly, there was some truth to Ian's claims to have saved their lives. Ian and his colleague Bob Ellis from the Police Scotland Virus Liaison Section had driven down from Scotland to find them and had arrived in just the nick of time to help. At least, she thought they were being helpful. She'd become increasingly suspicious of their motives and had reluctantly left the professor in their care. Her suspicions had been vindicated when the professor had a heart attack on the steps of the Parliament. Whether this was down to stress or something more sinister, she didn't know. But she did know that every fibre in her body distrusted Ian Jacobson. The car turned into the Scottish Government offices. "Hello there, gorgeous." The car bonnet nudged the barrier to the car park. Ian passed both their green cards to the woman in the security booth and blew her a kiss. Mona rolled her eyes, but the Scottish Government woman didn't seem so bothered. "Oh, you," she smiled and handed him his card back. "You'll be the death of me." The barrier to the car park lifted and Ian drove off. "Really?" Mona stared at him, arms folded. "What?" "Hello there, gorgeous. Is that how you talk to Scottish Government staff?" "What's wrong with that? I've known Margaret for years." "And that makes it okay?" "Yes. It's not like I walked into a meeting and groped the permanent secretary's arse or felt up an intern. Margaret's an old pal and she doesn't mind. In fact, judging by the smile she shot me, I think I made her day." "Well, I think it's a really unprofessional way to talk to women at work." He swung the car into a space so abruptly that she slid to the side, bumping her shoulder on the door. "Really, Mona?" He turned off the engine and twisted toward her, a hint of a smirk around his lips. "You of all people want to talk about behaving unprofessionally with women at work?" Her stomach lurched, and she turned to look out of the window. "Sudden silence, Mona? Aren't you going to say, 'Why, Ian, whatever do you mean?'" He knew. How could he know? How had he found out about the single stupidest thing that she'd ever done at work? Oh, God, he'd seen the video. She'd been set up, of course. Amanda Harris, a tiny, beautiful, as it turned out, psychopathic flatmate of a health defaulter, had turned to her for comfort. A reassuring hug had turned into something more, captured for posterity by a camera hidden in Amanda's hallway. Amanda had sent her a copy, a prelude to blackmail, she'd assumed at the time, although it hadn't turned into that. She'd always wondered if Amanda had made good on her threat to pass it on to Mona's colleagues, and she supposed that she knew the answer to that now. Stuttle and Ian had probably had a good laugh at it. Why was she even surprised that he knew? People like Ian Jacobson and Cameron Stuttle made it their business to know about people's indiscretions. "I mean, it's out of character for you to sit there quietly not asking any questions." Ian grinned at her, obviously enjoying the moment. Could it be that you are sitting there thinking, 'Oh God, surely he doesn't know about me throwing myself at Amanda Harris. Oh God, don't let him have seen the footage.'" He elbowed her, less than gently, in the ribs. "And in case that is something you're wondering about, I can confirm that I've seen it. Several times, in fact. Watching the two of you snogging like that, I have to tell you, you gave me a definite tingly feeling. Have you told your colleagues about your feelings for the ladies?" She didn't give him the satisfaction of turning round. She hadn't, in fact, had any kind of discussions with her colleagues about her sexuality, considering it was none of their business. "You're a pig, Ian. And you're a dyke, with such poor judgment that she lets herself be filmed kissing a witness in a health defaulter case. Has Amanda been in touch recently?" "No." She hesitated. "Has she been in touch with Stuttle?" He smiled. "Not for me to say. Shall we get on with our investigation?" "You fucker." His smile vanished. "I'm giving you one last chance to play nice, Mona. You were a pain in the arse last time I had to work with you, and I'm not putting up with that again. I know a lot more about you now, and this time you're going to do as you're told." The rational part of Mona's brain knew that this would be a good time to shut up, keep her head down, and get Ian out of her life as quickly as possible without antagonising him further. Unfortunately, her rational brain was a lot less assertive than her emotional one. She turned toward Ian, so fast that her seatbelt held her back. "You know a lot about me, do you?" she snapped. "Then you'll have learned enough to realise that I'm not going to let myself be bullied, especially not by one of Cameron Stuttle's lackeys." "Cameron Stuttle's lackey? That's a good one." He shook his head, still smirking. "Anyway, let's get in there. And Mona," he opened his car door, "try not to stick your tongue down the throat of any good-looking civil servants we come across in the course of this investigation." When Mona closed her door, the slam could be heard across the whole of Leith. Mona was aware of every eye in the virus operational response team, watching them as they walked through the department. She wondered how much they knew about their visit. It might have been more discreet to meet off-site, rather than have everyone in the team speculate as to why Helen Sopel was off work. Did civil servants all sign confidentiality agreements? She certainly hoped so, because explaining to Stuttle why their top-secret investigation was a headline in the Edinburgh Evening News would not be fun. The secretary who collected them from reception was a youthful 20-something, smartly dressed and immaculately made up. She showed them into a small meeting room, where, by way of contrast, a middle-aged man in a slightly crumpled suit was sitting. To Mona's surprise, the secretary sat down at the table and gestured to them to do likewise. "I'm Annika Thomas, deputy head of Vort." Mona reassessed the woman opposite her. Not a secretary, not by a long chalk. She looked impossibly young to be in such an important role, and her perfect hair and presentation made Mona wish she'd at least taken the time to drag a brush through her mop before she left the office. "And this is Simon from our team. I thought you might like to speak to him because he took the call from Helen's sister." Simon raised a hand in their direction. His slight air of dishevelment and slumped posture combined to give the impression that he was less than happy about being in this meeting. "Great, thanks for making the time to meet us. I'm Mona White, head officer at North Edinburgh, and this is Ian Jacobson." He pulled a notebook out of his pocket and sat, his pen poised. Mona noted that he hadn't mentioned he was from CID. Was this discretion? A little sin of omission? So that the Vort didn't start wondering what interest Police Scotland had in all this? Or did it suit the police to keep their distance from this investigation? "Do you have some particular questions for us?" Annika asked. Mona detected a slight accent in her voice, indicating that English, flawless though it was, probably wasn't her first language. "Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about Miss Sopel. What's she like?" "Highly effective." Annika's eyes sparkled. "She is demonstrating great leadership on virus issues. I regard Helen as a role model, particularly for women in the civil service. She's been very active in work to promote the role of women in public life and has done a lot of work on international cooperation on virus issues. And of course, she's very supportive of her team. So, a joy to work for." "Yes, definitely." She reinforced the point with a little curt nod. Mona saw a look flit across Simon's face, which appeared to contradict this. "Do you have anything to add, Simon?" He considered the question, his head on one side as if he was thinking about a number of different angles and potential responses. "No." He returned to staring at the desk. She'd have to finagle 5 minutes alone with Simon. The expressions on his less-than-poker face led her to suspect that his experiences of working with Helen Sopel might be quite different from Annika's, but she wasn't going to get the real story out of him with his boss sitting in the room. "What is Miss Sopel like outside of work? Did she socialise with colleagues? Did she have any hobbies?" "Helen doesn't have a lot of time for socialising." Annika looked slightly scandalised at the thought. "She's extremely dedicated to her work. To succeed at her level, you have to make a lot of sacrifices." "She came to the Christmas party," said Simon, "and left early." Annika glared at him, and he shifted uncomfortably on his seat. If this interview is anything to go by, the Vort did not seem to be a particularly happy place to work. She could relate to that. Simon's eyes flicked in the direction of the door, and she saw him pat his suit pocket. A smoker? Under pressure and desperate for a fag. "So, Simon," said Ian, Her sister phoned. Is that unusual? Well, yeah, I don't know how often she speaks to her sister, but I assume they use each other's mobile number. We don't get many personal calls coming through on office phones. And what did she say? She asked if Helen was there, and I said no. Could I take a message, etc., etc. She asked if Helen was out at a meeting, and when would she be back? And I said that she hadn't come into work this morning, and we'd had to cancel her 9:30 meeting, and we were actually wondering where she was. Then she started to get pretty panicky, and that's when I called Annika over. Annika picked up the story. Her sister, Joanne, was quite upset, saying that she'd arranged to meet Helen at Ocean Terminal last night to see a film, but she hadn't turned up and wasn't answering her phone. I said I would speak to someone senior and get back to her. And that someone senior, what did he say? Well, nothing yet, she frowned. I tried to speak to the Director of Health, but he's off sick today, which only left the permanent secretary, who hasn't got back to me. I assume she contacted you. Before Mona could open her mouth to lie, Ian leapt in. Can I have a word with you in private, Annika? Ian slid his notebook toward Mona. The word Simon was written in capitals, with an arrow pointing in the direction of the door. She didn't like Ian, but she had to admit their minds did operate in the same way. Divide and conquer. I might step out to the ladies if that's okay, Simon. Could you point me in the right direction? He looked mildly relieved that his part in the meeting was over. As the door closed behind them, she said quietly, Are you a smoker? He looked uncomfortable again. Yeah, I'm trying to give up, but... She cut him short. This would be a good time to nip out for a smoke. I see there's a shelter out the front. He nodded, a little confused. The ladies are back at the lifts. So, Helen Sopel, a joy to work for. Simon snorted and took a long drag on his cigarette. Yeah, if you're a fast-track high flyer who's fluent in 7 European languages and doesn't mind working until 9 p.m. every night. She loves them. Annika and her pals all think Helen is like, I don't know. He flung his hands up. The perfect woman or something. And if you're not a high flyer? Like me, you mean? He smiled. Only thing she ever speaks to me about is my, and I quote, disgusting smoking habit. The woman's a bully. You don't want to get on the wrong side of her. She nodded in what she hoped was a sympathetic manner. Not a good way to behave toward junior staff. Not just junior. She bullies everyone into getting her own way. I reckon even the perm sec is scared of her. I'm getting the picture. Any thoughts on where Miss Sopel might be? He stood up and took a long time stubbing out his cigarette. Mona sensed there were some thought processes at work. Is this all confidential? If I tell you something, it wouldn't come from me. That kind of depends on what you're about to tell me. Piece of office gossip? That I can do. Spill. Okay, but remember that this is just gossip. So, all the time I've worked for Helen, which is about 3 years, she's been single, at least as far as we all know. From what both you and Annika have said, I'm not surprised. She seems to be a workaholic. She is, but the past couple of months there's been a rumour floating around that she's having an affair. Mona leaned forward, intrigued. What makes you think that? Well, secretive mobile conversations. She's got a voice like a foghorn usually, but she's been sneaking out to take calls on her phone. It's all open plan here, so it's difficult to hide, and people have definitely noticed her disappearing off. She sat back, mildly disappointed. It's a bit of a leap to deduce an affair from a few phone calls. She could be ill. Her own situation popped into her mind. Or have a sick relation. She could be dealing with hospital appointments. True, but there's something else. There's a young girl in the team, Taylor, who deals with our admin. She's not even 20 yet, still lives with her parents. And one night, maybe about a month ago now, Taylor saw Helen sitting in a BMW about 11 o'clock at night in the car park at Holyrood House. The one that's actually in Holyrood Park. Yes, she pulled her face. Isn't it kind of dark there at 11 p.m? The darkness is the attraction for teenagers. Taylor and her boyfriend had bowled up there for a bit of a kiss and a cuddle, out of the way of prying eyes. He laughed. Must be great to be young and in love. Paradise by the dashboard lights and all that? Yeah, except the boyfriend's no sooner got the car out of gear when Taylor notices the woman in the big BMW next to them is Helen. Having a kiss and a cuddle? No, having a raging argument. And did Taylor see what the man looked like? No, she was so freaked out that she got her boyfriend to reverse right out of there before Helen clocked her. Taylor probably thought Helen would be discussing her car parking behaviour at her next appraisal if she caught her. No doubt the boyfriend was cursing Taylor's boss all the way back to his mum and dad's. She laughed. That's really helpful. Thanks for your time. No problem. They walked back toward the building. Well, at least there won't be any bullying going on today. Ha, don't bet on it. Annika's shaping up to be Helen Mark II. And she loves it when Helen's off. Gives her a chance to throw her weight around. He paused, with his hand on the revolving door. You might want to check Annika's flat in case she's got Helen tied up in a cupboard. He chuckled to himself as he went back into the building. Ian was already in the car by the time she got back. He gave her a little wave as she approached, which she took to be a placatory gesture after their earlier fight. She chose to ignore it. So, I take it you managed to get Simon on his own? He asked. Yep. Anything of interest? Possibly. She summarised their conversation with an emphasis on the fact it was all hearsay and relied heavily on the eyewitness testimony of a couple of horny teenagers. At the end of her tale, Ian threw his head back and laughed. So we're busting a gut looking for her, and she's probably off on a dirty weekend somewhere. Unlikely. The affair story is just the spin that Simon and his colleagues have put on all this. And despite what Annika said earlier, I'm getting the impression that Helen Sopel wasn't too popular with her staff, so it probably amuses them all to think that their annoying boss is off doing the dirty. Any idea who the bloke was in the car with Helen? No, the girl didn't get a proper look at him. And, whoever he was, I'm not convinced by the whole affair thing. Sitting in a car park at night having a full-blown argument with a man could have a lot of explanations, none of which relate to romance, but could still be relevant to her disappearance. If she was meeting someone in a car park in Holyrood Park, it was obviously someone that she didn't want to be seen in public with, and an argument definitely suggests that there was something bad going on. True. Did you find out anything else from Annika? Nothing useful. I had a very long explanation about the procedure that is triggered when a senior civil servant is unexpectedly absent, because apparently, if very important people are missing, it's vital that we check they haven't been kidnapped or defected to North Korea, because I wouldn't know that, would I? Oh, did the nasty woman patronise you? Mona grinned and felt a momentary disappointment that she hadn't been there to witness it. You should have told her she was gorgeous and blown her a kiss. Actually, she was pretty gorgeous. That's why I took her phone number. Mona's jaw dropped. You did what? Ah, the look on your face, he laughed. You're so gullible, Mona. You believe any old guff. There was a slight, almost imperceptible pause. I bet you believed all that nonsense that your friend Professor Bertram Fowler spouted. She felt a tiny thrill of adrenaline shoot through her. So, Ian was still interested in the professor, for no reason that she could immediately see. Until now, she'd considered that the professor had been silenced, at least temporarily, and was no longer of interest to Ian and his colleagues. And yet, here was Ian, still digging around. And exactly what nonsense would that be? You know, the stuff he was going on about when you were down in London? He waited for her to fill in the gap. Oh, right, she lowered her voice. You mean the top-secret conversation, when he confided in me that he thought that you and your mate Bob were arseholes? Oh, for God's sake, Mona. I'm not talking about the professor to you. For all I know, you were responsible for his heart attack. Seriously, you think Police Scotland now goes around attempting to murder elderly academics? No, Ian, But then I don't think that you actually work for Police Scotland, even if you do carry a warrant card. He shook his head, feigning disbelief. So, who do I work for? As she didn't know the answer to that. Yet, she kept quiet. Ian sighed and slid the car into gear. He put his arm around the back of her chair as he reversed out. He's in his 60s and was under an incredible amount of stress. Why can't you just believe he had a heart attack? He was fine when I left him with you to go to a safe house. Not very safe, was it? But you mark my words. As soon as he's back at work, I'll find out what really happened to him. He's not coming back. He's requested retirement, citing ill health. She stared at him. Seriously, he's taken his pension and gone. But leave the man in peace, Mona. See sense. It's well past his prime. Everyone knows he's been talking rubbish for the past few months. We should sit down and have a proper, non-confrontational conversation about what he said to you. I could put your mind at rest about a few things. I very much doubt that. He sighed again, a long and exaggerated outpouring of frustration. Have it your way. Anyway, can we focus on the investigation for a moment? We need to talk to the people at the museum. Mona looked at her watch. It's after 5 now. I'll call you tomorrow morning and we'll sort something out. Can't wait. She gazed out of the window, wondering what it was that Ian thought she knew, and why he was so worried about it.
End of CD 1. CD 2.
Chapter 4. Joanne Sopel's flat was extremely pale. A cream carpet extended out to magnolia walls. The sofa and armchair were both beige, with a selection of white woolen cushions fastened with wooden buttons. It was also incredibly neat. Every surface was free of belongings, with the exception of a set of fanned-out magazines on the coffee table. Being of that persuasion himself, Bernard wondered how she had managed to create quite such a minimalist space. His eyes wandered round the room, looking for innovative storage solutions he could implement in his new one-person flat. Maitland seemed considerably less aware of his surroundings, if the clump of mud that had detached itself from his shoe and was now resting on the cream carpet was anything to go by. It hadn't escaped Joanne Sopel's notice, though, and her head inclined toward it in what Bernard felt was quite a pointed manner. After a minute she snapped and stood up. "Excuse me, I'll just get that." Maitland leaned toward him and whispered, "Fiver says Helen Sopel's off somewhere with a boyfriend." Bernard frowned, one eye on the door in case Joanne Sopel came back. "There's nothing to suggest that." "Oh, come on. These high-flying types always have a secret boyfriend. Probably some handsome young tearaway that she's just using for..." Joanne reappeared with a dustbuster and hoovered up the dirt from around Maitland's feet. "Oh, sorry." Surprised at the intervention, he contemplated the soles of both shoes. Joanne left the dustbuster prominently displayed by her feet. Bernard decided to crack on with the interview before Maitland caused further havoc. "So, Miss Sopel, when was the last time you spoke to your sister?" "She texted me on Thursday, I think, about arrangements for our cinema trip on Sunday evening." "But you didn't actually speak to her?" She shook her head. "To be honest, I haven't actually spoken to her for weeks. All our communication has been by text. We've arranged to meet up a couple of times and she's had to cancel at the last minute due to something coming up at work." "So it wasn't unusual for her not to make your arrangements?" "No, obviously she was very busy with her job and the virus and everything, but she would always let me know that she wasn't coming. It isn't like her just not to turn up, and I've never known her not to answer her phone." "Does your sister have a partner, Miss Sopel?" She shook her head again. "No, she's single." Maitland leaned forward. "And you would definitely know if she was seeing someone. It's absolutely something she would confide in you." She looked irritated. Between the dirt and the intrusive questioning, Maitland wasn't endearing himself to her. "We're sisters, Mr. She peered at his lanyard. "Stevenson. She would tell me if she was seeing someone." "Are you sure? I mean, what if it was someone you wouldn't approve of? Would she still tell you then?" There was a flicker of doubt on her face. "Is she seeing someone? Do you know about a boyfriend?" Bernard cursed inwardly. There was just enough concern on her face to make him think that Maitland might be right about the boyfriend. He decided to pursue another avenue in the hope of avoiding a smug Maitland for the rest of the day. "No, we don't. We're just trying to get as full a picture of your sister's life as possible. As you pointed out, your sister has a very busy and probably quite stressful job. Is there any chance that it's all got a bit on top of her and she's taking some time out?" Joanne sighed. "Yes, I wondered that. My sister has always worked hard. In fact, I'd say she's a bit of a stress junkie. But there must come a point in everyone's life they just can't go on, mustn't there?" "Has she said anything to you that would indicate she's struggling to cope?" "No, not in so many words, but as I said, she's been a bit hard to contact the past few weeks. Maybe she's been avoiding me in case I started asking her difficult questions." She covered her face with her hands. "If anything has happened to her, I'll never forgive myself for not making more of an effort." "Please try not to worry, Miss Sopel. There's absolutely nothing to suggest she's come to any harm." Bernard hoped he sounded sufficiently reassuring. "But your sister did miss her health check yesterday." "Missed her health check?" Joanne slowly moved her fingers away from her eyes and looked up. "But Helen would never miss a health check. Her whole job was about dealing with the virus. She was part of the team that set up the system. She used to rant about how irresponsible people were who didn't turn up for their checks. The only reason Helen would miss a health check is if something terrible has happened to her." Her hands went back to her face and her shoulders shook as she started to cry. Bernard looked at Maitland, who, as usual in a difficult situation, shrugged. "Can we get you a glass of water or something, Miss Sopel?" "No," she sniffed. "I'm sorry." "Please don't apologise. We totally understand why you're upset. But for what it's worth, I still think that the most likely explanation is that your sister has taken an unscheduled time out. If she was stressed, can you think of anywhere she would go to get away from it all?" She thought for a moment. "No, I'm sorry, nothing comes to mind." "OK, well, I'll leave you a card if you think of anything." As she showed them out the door, she spoke again. "Helen would never, ever miss a health check. Please let me know as soon as you find out anything." "We will." "You owe me a £5. "No, I don't. There was nothing in that interview that even suggested, never mind proved, that she had a boyfriend. Even if she does have a boyfriend her sister is unaware of, there's nothing to say it's anything to do with her disappearance. People like Helen Sopel do not blow off work to spend time with a boyfriend." "Yeah, right." Maitland flung open the door to the office and marched through. It bounced back and Bernard had to throw his hands up to avoid being hit in the face by it. "OK, you will owe me a £5 in about 24 hours' time when we track them down to her secret love nest. Another £5 says Loverboy is under 25. "Shut up, Maitland." His colleague grabbed his arm and pointed at Patterson's office. The office was one corner of the main room, which had been cordoned off, floor to ceiling, using a no-frills selection of inadequately soundproofed materials to give the impression that their team leader actually had a private space befitting his status. "Doors shut. Do you think the gov's actually shown his face?" "What do we say to him?" "You don't say anything." Patterson's voice thundered through the layer of MDF. "Because I'm as pissed off as you are." They looked at each other. Bernard wondered if it would be a good time to make a tactical retreat to the canteen, although he was pretty sure that in this particular discussion the het officers actually had the high moral ground. "Well, come in then, you pair of clowns." Patterson's face looked every bit as pissed off as his voice had sounded. "So, you have seen the memo?" "Yep," said Maitland, "and we noticed that you made yourself scarce while we read it." "Not my idea. Stuttle's organised a meeting of all the het team leaders from across Scotland." "I was right," said Maitland, elbowing Bernard triumphantly, so that we could all be briefed on dealing with irate staff and difficult questions. They even had us role-playing, for Christ's sake. He shook his head as if he still couldn't believe the indignities he had suffered. So, if you've got something to say, I'm prepared. Maitland poked Bernard's shoulder, which Bernard took to mean that if anyone was telling Patterson about Carol's visit, it wasn't going to be Maitland. Mr. Patterson, Patterson sighed. OK, hit me. This is an outrage. Civil liberties must be illegal, etc., etc. No, it's not that. Well, it is all of that, but He pointed to Maitland and back to himself. If he was going down, he was taking Maitland with him. We thought that you should know that Carol came in today. Oh, God, really? Today? She has to pick today of all days to come back to work? With a resignation letter. He put his head in his hands. Did they not cover that in your briefing, Gov? Said Maitland cheerfully. It's a bit of a niche situation, Maitland. How did she take it? He looked up hopefully, as if there remained an outside chance that Carol might have seen the funny side of her servitude. She yelled a bit, then stormed out saying she was going to get a lawyer. I suppose if she makes it a legal issue, Stuttle or Shep's lawyers will have to take over dealing with it. Good one, Gov. Buck neatly passed. Patterson glared at Maitland. Anyway, how did you get on with finding the civil servant lassie? Her sister wasn't much help, to be honest, Mr. Patterson. She doesn't seem to have seen her recently. Maitland's theory is that she's got a secret boyfriend, but the sister couldn't confirm or deny it. You're probably right there, Maitland. You know how it is with these high-flying types. Tenor says the boyfriend's under 25. Good one, Gov. Bernard sighed, reflecting that he could be putting up with this sexism for a very long time. Well, seeing as the sister was a bit of a bust, we'll have to keep digging around. A thought occurred to Patterson. Unless Mona has a new lead. What's she been doing? She's still out with that Ian bloke from CID, Gov. They were interviewing Sopel's work colleagues. What's Mona's beef with him anyway? We sensed there was a bit of history there. Oh, I don't know, said Patterson. He picked up some papers and started leafing through them. You know what Mona's like? It's probably the lesbian thing. There was a silence of such utter quietness that the proverbial pin would have echoed like a grenade going off. Bernard wasn't quite sure he'd heard his boss correctly. The lesbian thing? Patterson's head snapped back up, a look of horror on his face. No, she's a dyke, Maitland laughed. I knew it. Mona's gay, Bernard muttered, mulling this revelation over. That makes a lot of sense. No, she's not. I mean, who knows? And obviously there's nothing wrong with it if she is, but I definitely didn't say that she was. Think you did, actually, Gov. Maitland clapped his hands together, grinning broadly. Patterson sighed and gave up the pretence. If either of you breathe a hint of this to Mona, I will make your life so miserable you'll wish you'd never been born, and you could be working for me for a very long time. He sighed again. I can't cope with both Carol and Mona wanting to kill me at the same time. The secret's safe with us, Gov, said Maitland. Come on, Bernie. He shuffled Bernard back out of Patterson's office and closed the door behind him. This is going to be fun. A lesbian, Bernard repeated. Makes a lot of sense. Chapter 5. The professor's work telephone rang 12 times, then switched to voicemail. Mona shifted impatiently on her bed, debating yet again whether she should leave a message. She desperately wanted to know that the professor was safe and well, and had been ringing him on a regular basis in the hope of him picking up her call and putting her mind at rest. So far she'd resisted the temptation to leave a message, uncertain exactly who would be monitoring his phone while he was on sick leave. And now, if Ian was to be believed, he wasn't coming back. Oh, Professor, she thought, what's happened to you? Ian seemed to think that Bertram Fowler had told her something of significance. Nonsense, he'd called it. The nonsense that your friend the Professor spouted. If the professor really had been spinning her a line, why was Ian so interested in it? And to her enduring frustration, why couldn't she think of what the nonsense could be? She lay on her bed and closed her eyes, trying to think of the conversations that they had had. They'd discussed his daughter, obviously, and London. They'd discussed the role of curfews in tackling the virus, which, although controversial, she doubted would be enough to get the professor nearly killed. They'd discussed his affection for Teresa. They'd talked about bacon rolls and coffee, for Christ's sake. None of this seemed significant, yet there was a dull throb in her temple that wouldn't go away. A pulse, pulse, pulse that spelled out that she had failed him. He'd suspected that he was in danger. He'd given her some vital information that could help to keep him safe, and she'd ignored it. She sat up and redialed the university switchboard. "Can I speak to Teresa Kilsyth, please?" If anyone knew the truth about whether the professor really was intending to retire, it would be his long-standing and long-suffering personal assistant. To her disappointment, the phone rang and rang. She counted 12 rings and was surprised to hear a 13th. No voicemail. She let it ring another dozen times and was on the point of hanging up when a slightly breathless female voice answered. "Teresa Kilsyth's phone." "Oh, right, hi, is Teresa there? Have I missed her for today?" "She's not working here anymore, I'm afraid. She handed in her notice a couple of weeks ago, and she had so much leave to take, I don't think she'll be back." "Oh, I see." This wasn't entirely surprising. Teresa and the professor had worked so closely together that she'd rather assumed that if one went, both would go. She tried a bit of digging. "The professor will miss her. He'll need to get a new assistant." There was a brief silence. "Professor B's not coming back either. Didn't you know he had a heart attack? It was on the news." "Oh, yes, of course. I thought he might be recovered by now, though. Is there anyone else who could help you?" The voice was beginning to sound a little curt, and Mona couldn't say she blamed her. Given the professor's profile, she suspected that they would have had a journalist or two fishing for information from his staff. She declined any further assistance and hung up. It looked as if the professor had been permanently silenced, chased from his high-profile role at the university, with all the protection of a tenured position. From her experience of him, she thought he would keep working until he dropped. Maybe he really was ill. Maybe Ian was right, and she should leave the man in peace. Or maybe, just maybe, he was in need of all the help he could get. If she knew where he lived, she could turn up on his doorstep and assess his health for herself. He was ex-directory, of course, but she could get his address, she was sure, by pulling in a few favours from her former Police Scotland colleagues. But she couldn't guarantee that Jacobson wouldn't hear about her asking around, and the last thing she wanted was him on her back. She'd already tried phoning the professor on his mobile, but the number he'd given her had returned a "this number is no longer in use" message. The number he'd given her. She jumped to her feet. When they'd parted, he'd given her his card, with a vague commitment to meeting for coffee. Except he hadn't just given her one card. He'd given her a little bundle of cards, held together with an elastic band. She'd assumed that he'd just absent-mindedly handed over the entire set of business cards he was carrying by mistake. But what if it was deliberate? What if he'd communicated something to her that he hadn't wanted Ian or Bob to see? And most pressingly, where the hell had she put the cards? After some digging around, she found it in a bowl of bits and pieces on her mantelpiece. She tugged impatiently at the elastic band, which snapped and scattered the cards across the floor. As they fell, she noticed that there was something written on the back of one of them. She peered at it, trying to decipher the professor's spindly handwriting. After a second or two of squinting, the letters formed themselves into a sentence. "Follow the orders of Mrs. Hilda Millwood." She frowned at the card. Was this an instruction for her, or just a note to himself? The professor had gone out of his way to give her the cards, but in a rush to hand them over discreetly, he could have given her the whole bundle by mistake. If it was an instruction, it was a pretty poor one. She'd no idea of who Hilda Millwood was, least of all how to contact her. The only thing that she could be totally confident about was that whatever it did actually mean, it was in no way, shape or form nonsense. Reaching under her bed, she pulled out her laptop, fired it up, and opened a search engine, eager to see if a simple search would give her a lead. Hilda Millwood, she typed. The search returned 6 results, all of them from sites that specialised in tracing family trees. She sighed, disappointed, but not entirely surprised. As far as she was aware, people had stopped naming their girl children Hilda somewhere around 1940. If Hilda was still alive, it was likely that she didn't have an active social media presence. She caught sight of the clock on her bedside table and realised with a start that it was later than she'd thought. Her dealings with the professor would have to wait. First thing in the morning, she would pull out all the stops to find out who Hilda Millwood was, why she was so significant, and where she lived. She'd waste no time tracking her down and doorstopping her. But that would have to be tomorrow's plan, not today's. Tonight, she was busy. Tonight, she had a prior engagement. Tonight, she had a date. Chapter 6. It turned out that there were 3 things which were very important to Bernard in a home. He had not been aware of this until recently, but over the weeks that he'd been staying at his colleague Marcus's flat, he'd thought about the nature of home a great deal. In fact, he'd lain awake hypothesising what his ideal accommodation would be. A model that was based largely on taking his existing living arrangements and choosing the exact opposite. His first requirement was a bed, a proper resting place with legs, a mattress, sheets and a duvet. Ideally, the bed would be situated in a bedroom, with a door, lockable if at all possible. He never realised how important a quality place to lay his head was to him. A bit like the old saying about health. He hadn't missed it until it was gone. 6 weeks in a sleeping bag on a blow-up mattress on Marcus's living room floor, tossing and turning in the breeze that blew under the door, had rammed home to him the importance of suitable slumber arrangements. His second prerequisite was silence, or at least the option to have peace and quiet occasionally. Marcus was an excellent IT technician and good friend, who had opened his home to Bernard in his hour of need. But good friend or not, Bernard had to admit that he was also quite annoying in some ways, and extremely annoying in others. His chief grievance was that Marcus was absolutely the world's worst at taking a hint. Many evenings, as the clock nudged 11, Bernard would yawn and make noises about going to bed. Marcus would nod enthusiastically, urging him to go for it, then continue to watch TV and give a running commentary on what was happening on the science fiction channel to Bernard's inert figure lying tense and frustrated on his damn blow-up bed. His final necessity in a home, although he would rather have died than admit it, was a woman to share his space with. He'd been married to Carrie for a very long time. While nobody could describe their last few years together as happy, the breakup of his marriage had left him with a deep, deep loneliness that no amount of nerdy companionship from Marcus and Bryce could overcome. Although he tried to keep this particular feeling to himself, his unhappiness must have been obvious, as it had been noted by his companions, who were quick to suggest a solution. "We know what you need to do," Bryce had said. Bernard was still dealing with the novelty of hearing Bryce actually speak. In 9 months of working with him, he hadn't heard Bryce utter a single syllable. He was renowned for his taciturn manner, which Bernard now knew to be a manifestation of extreme shyness, a shyness he appeared to have overcome as he got to know Bernard better. "You do?" "Online dating," Marcus had grinned. "Bryce and I are big fans." "Really?" He dug a little deeper into how 2 IT nerds, one of whom barely spoke, had managed to negotiate the troppy waters of internet dating, and had found that their enthusiasm was of a theoretical nature. In spite of their obvious willingness to embrace the world of virtual romance, neither of them had got as far as going on an actual face-to-face date. He'd allowed them to talk him through the process of signing up, creating a profile, and alienating women through inappropriate use of jokes in emails, but he remained unsure of the whole online dating option. He'd decided to seek more sensible counsel and had canvassed Mona on the subject. She reacted with a surprising degree of suspicion to his question about her position on the subject, and had asked him if he was having a go at her, which was a strange response even for her. He put it down to her usual reticence about talking about her private life. Given what he knew now, it could, of course, have been down to her thinking he was prying into what Patterson had tactlessly called the lesbian thing. But, all in all, he was glad to be moving out. He felt suddenly guilty at his train of thought. Marcus, for all his faults, had offered him a home when he needed it. His hints to Mona and Maitland had elicited no such offers. Mona had directed him to the Gumtree Rooms to Let category. Maitland had told him there was no way he was moving in with him, as he wasn't having Bernard hanging around the flat with a big hard-on for Kate. This had made him particularly angry, due to the element of truth in it. Kate, the curly-haired goddess, was to Bernard's mind way too good for Maitland. So, credit where it was due, he had a lot to be grateful for when it came to Marcus. When he stopped to think about it, he had a lot to be grateful to Bryce for too. He'd got to know him much better over the weeks he'd stayed at Marcus's place. Bryce had been sympathetic to his plight, supportive of his attempts to get his life back on track. A tentative friendship had developed between them, which he hoped would outlast his move to his own place. There was the honk of a horn from outside indicating that Marcus was here with the car. He picked up his bag and took a last look at the patch of carpet where he'd lain for the past few weeks. Onwards and upwards. Marcus's flat was high-ceilinged and airy, reflecting the grandeur and lofty ambitions of Edinburgh house builders from the era when the 19th century had slipped into the 20th. Bernard's new flat was from the era when the 20th century was giving way to the 21st and reflected the more modest ambitions of Edinburgh house builders to maximise every penny of profit from a piece of land. His flat was tiny. He'd felt claustrophobic even when the letting agent had been showing him around, keeping up a chirpy monologue about the accommodation's many space-saving features. He'd balked when she'd quoted a rent that was not far off the mortgage on his marital home, but he'd signed it on the spot. What choice did he have? He was still paying the mortgage on the flat that Carrie was now occupying solo. He supposed he could go back and negotiate with her, but as she wasn't working, it was unlikely that she'd be able to stump up. So, where do you want these? Marcus held aloft the 2 large plastic bags he was carrying. Bernard surveyed the furniture that wasn't his, dropped them on the sofa. Bryce appeared with the hard drive from his computer. We really need to talk to you, Bernard, about these modern inventions called tablets, or even laptops. Sorry, he smiled. I like my PC. Stone Age mentality. Marcus took his head. I'll get the rest of your prehistoric gear. He turned on his heel, and they could hear him singing the theme tune to The Flintstones as he jogged down the stairs. I think that's it now, said Bryce. Great, I'll stick the kettle on, assuming I can find some mugs. He looked round the kitchen/living room area, trying to work out which box or bag contained his limited selection of crockery. As he did so, he caught sight of Bryce leaning against a worktop with an expression on his face that hinted worry. You're looking very pensive. What's up? His frown deepened. Bernard, can I ask you something? Something about Marcus? He nodded, puzzled. You noticed any change in him recently? Bernard thought for a moment. I don't think so. What kind of change? I'm worried about him, Bernard. I'm worried about... The man in question came bouncing back into the room, armed with a monitor which he dumped on the floor. And we nearly forgot. He reached into his rucksack and pulled out a plastic bag. A housewarming present. Bernard delved into the bag. A pencil holder. Bryce's idea. Marcus gave one of his distinctive giggles, high-pitched and nasal. We thought if you were the kind of Luddite that still has a PC, you're probably the kind of freak who still uses pen and paper. They had him pegged. He held the ceramic pot aloft. That's really thoughtful. Thanks for everything, guys. Marcus shot him a cheery grin, but behind his back he could see that Bryce still looked worried. He gave Bernard a sad wave, and with that they were gone. The door closed on Marcus's chattering, and suddenly the flat was very, very quiet. Bliss. Chapter 7. The Delphin was small and cosy, with rough-hewn stone walls and stripped wooden floors. Situated in the basement of a Georgian building on one of the quieter Newtown streets, its cellar setting meant that the building was full of nooks and crannies, with tables set at a discreet distance from the neighbouring diners. There really couldn't be a better place in Edinburgh for a first date. Unfortunately, Mona hadn't yet made it into the restaurant. She stood in a doorway on the opposite side of the road, trying desperately not to give in to a full-scale panic attack. She counted slowly to 10 in an effort to get her breathing properly under control, and told herself she was being ridiculous. She'd been shot at and had picked herself up and kept going without a second thought. She dealt day to day with the pressure and politics of the Het without her heart rate rising so much as a beat. The nearest she'd came to getting stressed was dealing with her mother. Yet, here she was, embarking on her first date in years and turning into a complete basket case. On top of everything else, she was late. There was a very real possibility that she just wasn't cut out for online dating. Her love life until this point, such as it had been conducted face-to-face and generally in a state of inebriation. It hadn't been planned. There had been no slow build-up, no getting to know someone, picturing what they might be like, wondering if they would like you too, or if you were staring rejection in the face. Now here she was, stone-cold sober, and about to meet up with a woman called Elaine, with whom her only contact had been a series of email messages. Good emails, though, warm, witty, indicative of someone who did more than slump in front of the TV every night. Emails from someone fantastic, who might turn out to be the kind of person she could spend the rest of her life with, although it was equally likely her date might take one look at her and reject her good and proper. But she'd never find out if she didn't get her feet to start moving in the direction of the Delphin. The door behind her opened, revealing a Newtown matron holding a bag of rubbish. She tutted as she walked past. "This isn't public property, you know." Mona muttered an apology and moved swiftly in the direction of the restaurant. Here goes nothing. The restaurant smelled of garlic and herbs. Her stomach growled. She'd been so busy worrying about the date, she'd forgotten that she was actually hungry. "Do you have a reservation?" The woman at the reception smiled at her. Yes, it's in the name of White." She looked at her list and picked up a menu. "Ah, yes, the other member of your party is already here." She walked on, her high heels clicking on the stone floor. Mona followed her, her heart bouncing around like an army truck on a potholed road. There was a lone woman sitting at a table, her back to them. She had thick auburn hair cut short. It stuck out at an angle that Mona found endearing. The woman swivelled round as she heard them approach. "Mona?" She nodded, her throat suddenly dry. The waitress stood in polite silence while she lowered herself rather clumsily into the seat. "Can I offer you a drink?" Elaine held her glass up, which was now only half full. "I recommend the Rioja." Mona smiled mutely at the waitress, hoping that she recovered her voice before she looked like a complete idiot. Her date took a large swig of her wine, then reached for one of the breadsticks that were in a little tub in the centre of the table. She slowly chewed her way through one, all the time staring at Mona in a manner that suggested she was slightly amused by the situation. Eventually she spoke. "So, Mona, are you a regular internet dater?" "No, I'm really not." She was relieved to find that she could still actually speak. "In fact, I'm pretty nervous about the whole thing." "Me too." Mona was surprised by this. She really wasn't getting an anxious kind of vibe from her date. "You don't look nervous." Elaine leaned in, conspiratorially. "Promise you won't judge me, but this isn't my first glass of wine this evening." She laughed, then gently put her hand on top of Mona's. "So, tell me everything about you." Mona was very aware of the pressure of Elaine's touch. She resisted the temptation to pull her hand away. "Everything? I'm not sure there's much to tell." Her wine arrived, and with her free hand she lifted the glass and took a very large gulp indeed. "Oh, I'm sure that's not true. And by the end of this evening, I intend to get it all out of you." There was something very reassuring about Elaine's voice. She had an overwhelming desire to confide in her, restrained only by a suspicion that there wasn't anything in her life that would be of interest to a stranger. She took another large swig of Rioja. There's really nothing to tell. Elaine gave a mock sigh of frustration. OK, let's start with the easy questions. Brothers and sisters. She shook her head. Only one, I'm afraid. And what did your parents do? Dad, now dead, was a cop. Mum taught nursery school. And with that, she was off. Over the starter, they continued with her childhood. The main course covered her university years. Napier Uni, business studies. Hadn't much enjoyed the whole student experience. 2 creme brulees arrived for pudding. And the het, Mona. Elaine gently hit the top of her pudding with a spoon. That must be fascinating. Not really. CID was more interesting. She peered at the debris on the table. Were they really onto their second bottle of red? And I'm fed up of the lack of resources we have at our disposal. Oh yeah. What does it stop you doing? Well, like, at the moment, we're looking for a missing civil servant, and it's really important that we find her as soon as possible. But there's only 3 of us actually looking for her. I dare say a missing civil servant isn't a big crisis. Yeah, but she's important in terms of virus stuff, and her colleague has just committed suicide, so we need to find her. Anyway, I don't want to bore you with work. It doesn't sound boring. I'm picturing you chasing bad guys and wrestling them to the ground. Her eyes flicked over Mona, as if she was imagining Mona doing just that. You look like you'd be very good at that kind of thing. Do I? Oh yes, I can imagine you spend a lot of time getting toned at the gym. Again her eyes flicked over her, and Mona felt a surge of lust, followed immediately by a dampener of fear. If Elaine wanted to see her gym-toned body, she wasn't going to disappoint, but not tonight. She wasn't quite ready yet. Even if she had been ready, she was now so seriously drunk that she wasn't sure that she could deliver much in the way of bedroom gymnastics tonight. She wasn't entirely confident she could walk, never mind anything more energetic. You know what, Elaine, I've just realised I've rabbited on about me all night, but asked you next to nothing about you. Tell me about your life. I don't even know what you do for a living. She grinned a little blearily. She felt bad for going on about herself, but there was something about Elaine that was so soothing, so familiar, that she couldn't help but talk to her. It was like she'd been listening to her voice all her life. Maybe this was the way love felt, being so comfortable with someone that it felt like you already knew them. Elaine picked up their bottle of wine and poured the last dregs of it into Mona's glass. Amongst other things, I write. Would I have read any of your work? Possibly. She played with her empty glass. I mainly work on the radio these days. That voice! Somewhere in Mona's booze-befuddled brain, the cogs started turning. That ability to reassure, to get you to talk about yourself. Elaine's voice sounded familiar because she'd heard it before. She'd heard her on the radio, but she didn't think she was the kind of presenter who played records. No, she was more. Oh, God! The realisation of where she'd heard the voice before hit her. You're that DJ that hates everyone. What's your name again? She snapped her fingers until it came to her. You're Cassandra Doom. Guilty as charged. She gave a little salute with the wine glass. Obviously not my real name. Sounds rather better than Elaine McGilvery, though. I'm sure you'll agree. Oh, God! Mona rested her head on her hands. What did I tell you about the het? She couldn't remember exactly what she'd said. Damn the alcohol. Relax, I'm off duty. Mona looked up at her. Was this true? Were right-wing shock jocks ever off duty? My boss would have a fit if he knew I was here. He hates you with a passion. I get that a lot. She didn't look particularly upset, which was more than could be said for Patterson if he ever found out about Mona's evening out. Cassandra Doom had devoted an entire programme to the het and its infringement on citizens' inalienable rights to go around infecting their neighbours. She followed this up with a regular segment on the absurdities of het activities across the country, supplementing her radioactivity with a weekly column in The Citizen. Outraged as Patterson was by the het comments, Mona suspected that there was a lot of common ground between the two of them on benefits claimants, policing, and interference of the government in parenting. You didn't invite me on a date specifically because I work for the Het, did you? Of course not. I invited you because you were by far the best-looking woman on the site. Mona eyed her suspiciously. If I'd invited you here just to get information about the Het, I wouldn't have admitted to who I am. This is full disclosure, Mona. She reached across the table for her hand. Because I've really enjoyed tonight, and I'd very much like to see you again. I'll think about it, she lied. She reached into her purse and threw some money on the table. She was sobering up fast. Work in the morning. She scuttled out of the restaurant, hoping to God that there was no way that Patterson, or even worse, Stuttle, could find out about her dining companion. Tuesday. Pocketful of Posies. Chapter 1. Bernard was back at his desk after a very comfortable night's sleep. He'd enjoyed the luxury of sleeping in an actual bed, with clean sheets and a proper duvet. He'd retired to his room at a bedtime of his own choosing, after a peaceful evening which had involved no discussion whatsoever of Star Trek, The Walking Dead, or Buffy the Vampire Slayer. If he was entirely honest with himself, the evening had dragged a little. Well, quite a lot, actually. By 11 o'clock he'd find himself quite missing Marcus's prattling. The key to living alone, he speculated, was to keep yourself busy. Probably the best thing to do with a one-person flat was to spend as little time as possible actually alone in it. He clicked on his first email, which came from a Police Scotland address. The message drew his attention to its attachment, a photograph of the suicide note left by Nathan McPhee. Ooh! He clicked eagerly on the icon and was disappointed to find himself looking at a very brief scrawled note. I'm not prepared to go on like this. I quit. Nathan McPhee. Was it a suicide note? His money would have been on a resignation letter, albeit not one that followed conventional best practice. The handwriting was appalling. He'd like to see a sample of McPhee's normal writing to establish if he was naturally messy or whether this note had been written under duress, or, of course, the last desperate scribblings of a man about to kill himself. He checked the email again, and Police Scotland had definitely referred to it as a suicide note. He looked at the note again and shook his head. I quit. That was resignation talk, he was sure. But either way, whether McPhee had been driven to self-murder or self-preservation, what had he been unwilling to continue to do? Morning, loser! Maitland swept in with a grin. Look what I've got. He held up a little floral book. A sudden fondness for Kath Kidson's stationery? Very funny. This is Helen Sopel's address book. Her sister was hanging around reception when I came in. She thought it might assist in our inquiries. He flicked through it. Somewhere in here is the phone number of whatever young hunk it is that she's having it off with. I still think that idea's nonsense, and even if she did have a boyfriend's number in her phone, I doubt she's got his address in there with little hearts drawn round his name. The book's a good start, I suppose. Can I help? Your performance over the last 9 months suggests that's unlikely. Maitland smirked and threw himself onto his seat, picking up his phone as he went. You just carry on daydreaming. Bernard opened his mouth, then realised he didn't actually have a retort. He swivelled back to his computer and fumed. He'd tell Mona how annoying Maitland was being as soon as she got in. Hello, my name is Maitland Stevenson and I'm phoning from the Health Enforcement Team. Mona. He'd almost forgotten the discussion yesterday. The important thing was not to treat her any differently now that he knew she was gay. Her sexuality was her own business, and nobody had the right to comment on it. He should probably remind Maitland of that fact before she arrived. And I have to remind you that under the terms of the Defaulters Act, Scotland, you are not allowed to tell anyone that we are looking for Miss Sopel. Maitland caught his eye and made a dismissive gesture, suggesting that he might want to turn round and mind his own business. Morning, Bernard. What's he up to? Patterson lingered by his desk. Helen Sopel's sister dropped her address book off this morning. Maitland's ringing round the numbers in it. Good stuff. Any sign of Mona yet? He shook his head. Mum's the word on that one, OK? I'm not the one you have to worry about. He jerked his thumb in the direction of Maitland. Fair point. And Carol? Do you really think she'll be back? He grunted and walked into his office. Mr. Patterson, I have a couple of questions. Oh, good. Bernard assumed this was sarcasm, but decided to press on regardless. Helen Sopel's sister is actually looking for her. Doesn't that make her a missing person rather than a health defaulter? Shouldn't this investigation be the remit of Police Scotland? Patterson raised an eyebrow in response. Bernard was unsure if he got the point that he was trying to make. The Het is only supposed to investigate people who haven't been reported missing, as they are much more likely to be suffering from the virus. You know, chaotic lifestyles and... Stop! Patterson raised a hand. I work for the Het, Bernard. I do know that. You look confused. I was slightly confused by your naivety, that's all. OK, just so that you are clear on all this, as of yesterday, Helen Sopel is officially both a missing person and a health defaulter. It's a joint operation between the Het and the police. But just let it go, eh, Bernard? Letting things go was not Bernard's strong point. But our terms of reference clearly say that we only investigate if the person hasn't been reported missing. And Helen Sopel wasn't reported missing at 8:35 a.m. yesterday morning, when I assume Shep leapt into action and declared her a health defaulter. Why did they... Bernard, close the door. He hesitated for a minute, trying to establish which side of the door he was supposed to be on as it closed. He gambled on inside, which, judging by the lack of shouting, appeared to be the correct choice. Bernard, I'm now going to give you a crash course on how the world works. People of Helen Sopel's importance aren't left to their own devices about these things. It's not like you or me defaulting. Someone like Miss Sopel misses a health check, and the emergency telephone in Stuttle's office starts glowing bright red. Really? Not literally, no. But he'd get an early warning of it and make it Het business rather than Police Scotland. But why us and not Police Scotland? Easy. What was Maitland saying to all those people on the phone? He considered the question. That Helen Sopel was missing? Not that. The 14-day rule. Under the terms of the Defaulters Act, Scotland, you are not allowed to tell anyone that we are looking for blah, blah, blah. Soon as someone goes missing, if the press get a whiff of it, they can start asking Police Scotland difficult questions. But if the Fourth Estate so much as hints that someone has missed a health check, they're up in court. I wonder if the civil liberties types realised what a powerful tool they were given to the likes of Stuttle when they pushed for a 14-day window of silence. Why is it a powerful tool? Oh, for God's sake, Bernard, don't you get it? He sighed so heavily a sheet of paper blew gently off his desk. Bernard retrieved it. As soon as someone misses a health check, it gives Stuttle and his cronies carte blanche to poke around in their life for 2 whole weeks without the general public getting to know about it. Lets them do whatever... Oh, crap. Patterson was staring over Bernard's shoulder, looking out through the small glass window in his office door. Was that Carol just arriving, Mr. Patterson? He sighed, and the sheet of paper was airborne once more. Bernard retrieved it again, and this time weighted it down with a coffee mug. Looks like it. Oh well, better get this over with. Carol looked up as the door opened, and the conversation she had been having with Maitland ground to an abrupt halt. Maitland grinned and slid back into his own seat. He caught Bernard's eye and winked, obviously delighted to be watching the showdown that was about to take place. Bernard felt rather less happy at the prospect. Carol, said Patterson, with a somewhat forced joviality. I'd heard you were back. Feeling better, I hope? The look on her face would have driven lesser men to retreat to their office, lock the door firmly behind them, and dig deep into their bottom drawer for the bottle of spirits they kept there for just such occasions. Patterson settled for folding his arms. Let's get one thing clear, Mr. Patterson. I want to resign from the Het. That's not actually possible. I know. I want to resign, and I will resign. Right now, I've got a lawyer talking to Shep about it. So, why are you here? Asked Bernard. Carol turned her glare in his direction. Because, Bernard, my lawyer thought it would be a good idea if I carried on as normal until he works out exactly how we can sue Shep. Well, obviously, we're delighted that you're back. Patterson gave Carol a rictus smile, which appeared to infuriate her further. She threw her bag in the direction of her desk and followed it. Undaunted, Patterson continued. Yes, it's good that we've got all hands on deck. We need to get this civil servant found pronto. Maitland, any joy from your ring round? Not much. There were only 6 contacts in the address book, and only 1 person has seen her this year. OK, you checking that out? Yes. Take Carol with you. She didn't turn round. I don't think so. Maitland and Bernard looked at each other, then at their boss. After a minute he nodded. Probably best to ease yourself in. Bernard, you go with Maitland and... He stopped as his phone buzzed. A text from Mona. Maitland burst into a chorus of, I am what I am. Patterson looked up from his phone in annoyance. Bernard caught his eye. I told you it was him you needed to worry about. Patterson retreated to his office, its walls wobbling as he slammed the door behind him. Chapter 2. Mona's whole body was aching. Her head was pounding, and she had a horrible queasiness in her stomach. 2 bottles of wine on a school night were bad. She might have got away with it if she'd had a good night's sleep, but her slumbers had been dogged by anxiety dreams. In every one of them, she was trying to keep a secret from someone. Sometimes it was her mother, or she was back at school and trying to pull the wool over a teacher's eyes. But mostly the dreams involved Patterson. Her subconscious was not overly subtle. She must have been crazy to think that internet dating was for her. You had no idea who anyone really was. People knocked years off their age, or forgot to mention they were married, or, as had happened last night, they completely lied about their motivation. As she'd sat there, without taking the slightest time to find out who the woman really was, and had ended up spilling her heart out about the difficulties of working for the Het to a woman who made a career out of slagging them off, she hoped to God she hadn't handed her any ammunition, particularly any juicy snippets that could only have come from the North Edinburgh Het. And now she was running half an hour late for work, and if the bathroom mirror was to be believed, she looked like a reanimated corpse. She leaned her head against the mirror and groaned. She needed to be well. She needed to get into the office and arrange a meeting with Jasper Connington, the other civil servant who had been at the museum meeting. And she needed Connington not to act like civil servants usually did, but actually give her a straight answer to what their meeting had been about. She washed her face, brushed her teeth, and stared at her reflection in the hope it had improved. It hadn't. If anything, she looked even more obviously hungover than before. She twisted the lid off a bottle of mouthwash and swigged it as enthusiastically as she had the Rioja the previous night. It had just hit her tonsils when her landline started to ring. She considered just letting it ring. 90% of the calls on it were telemarketers, people inquiring if she'd recently had an accident and wanted to sue someone, fake IT engineers, or other assorted scammers and crooks. Unfortunately, the other 10% of calls came from her mother. She spat the bright blue liquid into the sink and raced to the phone. Mona? Her mother sounded even frailer than usual. I don't want you to worry, but I'm at the hospital. Oh my God, what happened? I fell getting out of bed this morning. Got my foot caught in the blankets. I'll come right over. Don't be silly. You have your work to go to. I'll be fine. For a second, Mona hesitated, then realised what was expected of her. I'll be right over. 45 minutes later, she was sitting outside her mother's ward at the Royal Infirmary. Patterson had been fine about her taking an unexpected morning off. In fact, he sounded completely distracted when she'd spoken to him. leading her to wonder if Carol had turned up for work today. For all her boss's bluster and fury, he tended to be flummoxed by female anger directed at him, although given his ability to piss women off by his mid-50s, he really ought to be used to it.
End of CD 2. CD 3.
His main response when challenged by a female member of staff was to retire to his office and sulk. She had, in her time, been on the receiving end of many a Patterson huff. Ms. White, a female doctor, approached her, hand outstretched, and sat beside her on the plastic seats. "I'm Dr. Lewis. Your mother's had a bit of a fall, I'm afraid." Mona pictured the worst. "Is she badly hurt?" "No broken bones, but I think she's had a bit of a fright. Her ankle is rather swollen, so she's struggling to walk. She needs a good rest. So you'll be keeping her in overnight?" A look passed across the doctor's face, which Mona tried to place. Embarrassment mixed with something else. Determination. Defiance? "Actually, we were hoping that you could take your mother home now." So that was it. The chronic lack of beds meant that a cancer-stricken 60-year-old was being turfed back out to fend for herself. "Is she fit to go back home?" "Not on her own. Could she stay with you?" "I live in a second-floor flat. She struggles with my stairs even when she hasn't just fallen." "Could you stay at hers?" Mona struggled to find a reason why this wouldn't be possible. She hesitated a moment too long, and Dr. Lewis stood up. "Right," she said. "I'll get your mother discharged. Would you like to borrow a wheelchair to get her to the car?" "I suppose I'll need one," Mona snapped, seeing as she can't actually walk. But Dr. Lewis had already turned away, the look of embarrassment, determination, defiance, or whatever, all replaced by one of relief. Another patient, out the door. "I know I shouldn't say this, Mona, now that you work for the health service. I work for the health enforcement team, Mum, not the NHS. But the NHS isn't what it was. That doctor back there took one look at my notes, then thought, well, this one's going to die soon anyway, so we might as well kick her out and give the bed to someone with a fighting chance. Don't say that, Mum." Mona felt a pang of fear inside her, as always when she thought about her mother's impending death. They just need the beds. Well, I suppose you feel compelled to defend them now that you're working for them. The fear she had felt a moment ago was edged out of the way by her usual feeling of irritation with her mother. "I don't work—" "Oh, you know what, never mind." She snapped the radio on. "Your father, God rest his soul, would be horrified at the state of the NHS. She concentrated on the radio, trying to block her mother out. The last thing she wanted to think about under the circumstances was her father's death. She tuned her ear to Radio Scotland, which was broadcasting its hourly news bulletin. The headline was unusually positive. Economic growth had risen for the first time in 2 years, albeit by a teeny tiny amount. The nurses on the night he died were superlative. Not listening, not listening, not listening. A new wind farm was being built on the west coast of Scotland. I was in pieces with his heart attack being so sudden. The utility companies were defending their latest round of price hikes. Nobody was kicking us out the door back then. A senior civil servant working on virus policy had been found dead in an apparent suicide. Mona swerved the car over to the side of the road. What was... Shh! She pointed at the radio, but the newsreader had moved on to a jovial and, finally, item. "Did you hear that last item, Mum? Did they mention a name?" "I wasn't listening, Mona. I was talking." "Mum, I'm really sorry about your accident, and please don't take this the wrong way, but I'm going to have to just get you settled in and go straight back to work." Her mother tutted. "Of course, Mona. It's always about your work, isn't it? Just like your father." She turned, pointedly, to look out of the window. And look what happened to him. Chapter 3. Silence reigned in the Het office. Patterson, Maitland and Bernard were huddled round one computer, while Carol was sat some distance away from them, scrolled through something on her mobile. "Gov," Mona panted, slightly out of breath after racing up from the car park. "I heard on the radio that a senior virus civil servant had committed suicide." Three heads snapped toward her. "Did they give a name?" asked Patterson. "No, Gov." "Then you know what we know. Brains here." He tapped Bernard on the head. "Spotted it on the BBC website." "I get notifications," said Bernard, "whenever there's a story about the virus." So he gets a notification thingy, and before I've even had time to look at the story, Stuttle's on the phone saying he's coming over and bringing that lanky geek from IT with him. "Marcus? Why's he coming over?" "How's your mother, Mona?" Carol looked up from her phone. "Just a twisted ankle, thanks for asking." "Well, I thought that someone should show an interest, seeing as it was clear that senior management had no interest whatsoever in your family crisis." She gave a theatrical sigh. "In my experience, head management have no interest at all in the pressures their staff are under." Patterson's face turned puce. "Of course I'm concerned about her mother, Carol." He turned to her. "She's okay, isn't she, Mona?" "Fine, Gov. Do we know if—" "And I want to make it clear to everyone that I am very concerned about the personal well-being of all my staff." "Good stuff, Gov," Maitland grinned. "Maybe we should all share how we're feeling at the moment. Why don't you start by asking Mona about her love life? Is there some great big manly hunk that you're currently seeing?" He made a to and fro gesture with his arms that clarified what he meant by seeing. "I said I was interested in my staff's well-being, not their love life, Maitland. Mona's love life is entirely her own business." "Well said, Mr. Patterson." Bernard patted her on the shoulder. "Totally private business." Her colleagues were being particularly idiotic this morning. "Thanks for clarifying that, everyone, but can we focus on this?" She pointed at the BBC website. "Do we know if someone has leaked the information about Nathan McVee's death?" "That's the best case scenario. Worst case, someone's found Helen Sopel's body." Footsteps could be heard in the hall, approaching at some speed. When Stuttle appeared in the doorway, he was framed on one side by the tall, bespectacled Marcus, and on the other side by Ian Jacobson. Mona was used to seeing Stuttle looking stressed. You couldn't be head of an organisation fighting a virus that had already killed 100,000 people in Scotland without having a few sleepless nights. But today he looked as if his head was close to exploding. "Close the door behind us." Ian slammed it shut with his foot. Stuttle scowled at them, his eyes moving over each of them in turn. "What are you fuckers playing at?" Mona immediately flicked through the file of facts in her brain to see if she could have done anything to cause Stuttle's outburst. He wouldn't be happy if he knew about her dining companion from last night, and she'd definitely be under suspicion if someone had leaked information about Nathan McVee's death. Her memory of the night was hazy, but she couldn't remember referring to him. But then she couldn't remember much about the evening at all. Anyway, if it was specifically her he was annoyed with, he'd come out and say it. He seemed to be blaming them collectively for something. She cast an eye over her colleagues. Bernard was looking mildly panic-stricken, which could mean that he'd done something, but then that was his natural expression when there was work-related shouting going on. Maitland looked confused rather than guilty, but he could have done something and just be too wrapped up in himself to notice. Carol was smiling to herself, but it was unlikely that she'd had time to implement some devilish master plan since yesterday, which left the Gov. "Well, one of you say something." Patterson sighed. "Could you lose the attitude for a second, Cameron, and explain to us what it is we're supposed to have done?" "That," Stuttle pointed at the computer where the death of a civil servant webpage was still showing, "and the internet." "The internet? We're responsible for that now, are we?" Patterson rolled his eyes. Mona winced. This really wasn't the time to wind Stuttle up. "If I can interject," Marcus pushed his little round glasses up the bridge of his nose and smiled at them all. "Mr. Stuttle is talking specifically about the what do they do now hashtag, which I'm sure you're all familiar with." Bernard nodded vigorously, and the rest of them looked at him in confused silence. Marcus reassessed his audience. OK, let's start with hashtag. Does everyone know what a hashtag is and how they're used on Twitter? 4 muted yeses were drowned out by a very loud no from Patterson. Marcus walked over to the whiteboard, picked up a pen and drew a hashtag sign. A hashtag, usually found in front of a word or phrase, he wrote hashtag football and hashtag community on the board. It helps you to search for posts on a particular theme on social media. If you search, for example, for the hashtag football one, it'll bring up everyone who has used that, he pointed to, hashtag football in their tweet. OK, said Patterson with a hint of uncertainty in his tone. Mona wondered if Patterson had ever actually strayed onto Twitter or Facebook. She suspected he would have some follow-up questions once they got shot of Stuttle. Marcus wrote, hashtag what do they know, on the whiteboard. Now, hashtags are often used for political discussions, particularly on Twitter, and this one is used a lot with reference to the virus. What do they know? Maitland frowned at the board. What do who know? About what? A good question, said Ian. I usually find that nobody knows anything. Marcus beamed. It's a kind of catch-all, if you like, for all kinds of conspiracy theories. Sometimes there'll be a flurry of tweets suggesting that the Scottish Government already has a cure for the virus, which it's refusing to share. Sometimes there are tweets suggesting that the government knows that there is no cure for the virus and is refusing to tell people. Sometimes it's Shep and the Hets in the firing line. Sometimes the NHS. Sometimes Police Scotland. But the general thrust of it is that the public is not being kept informed. So for obvious reasons, we keep an eye on it, and today it's been going crazy. So I phoned Mr. Stuttle to draw his attention to it, and he wanted to know why bloody Twitter is full of information that I thought was confidential to this investigation. How did Twitter know about the civil servants meeting at the Museum of Plagues and Pandemics? Answer me! Wherever the leak came from, it won't be from here, said Patterson firmly. But before we get any further into this nonsense, can you at least tell us who they're talking about? Have they leaked the fact that Nathan McVie killed himself? Or has Helen Sopel turned up dead? Stuttle glared at him as if he was crazy. It's neither of them. Jasper Connington was found dead in his bed this morning with an empty bottle of pills on his bedside table. He sank into a chair. Will somebody please tell me what the fuck is going on? Chapter 4. Do you ever think, Bernie, that we get the least interesting leads to follow up? They were in a pool car heading to the Royal Bank of Scotland complex on the northern outskirts of Edinburgh. Maitland had insisted on driving, which suited Bernard just fine, as it let him surf the internet, while paying a minimal amount of attention to his colleagues' chat. I mean, Mona's off with that Ian bloke following up the Connington suicide, and we're schlepping across town to chat with some woman from Sopel's address book, who probably won't have anything useful to say to us, on account of not having seen her for months. Is that so bad? He looked up from his phone. Yes! Yet again we're doing the boring drudge work while Mona is off for the exciting leads. I'm not sure how exciting going to see a recently bereaved man is going to be. He's probably still in shock after finding the body. I'm far happier going to see this friend of Miss Sopel's. His eyes returned to his phone. What are you tapping away at? I'm following the hashtag what do they know hashtag on Twitter. It's no wonder Mr. Stuttle's annoyed. Give me the flavour of it then. OK, try this one. What was purpose of civil service meeting? No minutes. Agenda. Hashtag what do they know? That is actually a fair point. We don't know that either. But how does Twitter even know that there was a meeting? Either someone found out about the meeting and tweeted about it, or they told someone else who did. And given the top-secret nature of our briefing with Mr. Stuttle, it would have to be someone from the Het, which I'm assuming it isn't. Of course not. Or one of the participants, or someone who was close to them. Not Helen Sopel then, He doesn't seem to be close to anyone. True, or it could have been a member of the museum staff. Well, that can be one of our questions to them when we see them later. Hit me with another tweet. Bernard scrolled down until he found a good one. The virus is man-made, civil service caused this rot in hell. Hashtag, what do they know? There are a lot of tweets on that particular theme, and we're coming in for a lot of stick too. Het equals Nazis going to kill us all. Hashtag, what do they know? Maitland tutted. Why do people persist in thinking that the Het is trying to kill them? I don't know, but they're very persistent in that view and very vocal about it on Twitter. And then there are the crazies who want to get their retaliation in first. Listen to this one. Time that we killed these Het fuckers. Who's with me? Hashtag, what do they know? Honestly, the grammar and spelling in some of these tweets is appalling. What? Did someone seriously write that? A death threat? Do you think we should tell Stuttle? Bernard wondered how much time Maitland had spent on Twitter. If we're going to tell him about that one, there's about another 1,000,000 he needs to consider as well. Seriously? Maitland swerved and came dangerously close to the wrong side of the road. A car on the other side beeped at him. For goodness sake, Maitland, don't do the internet's work for it and kill us both. And slow down. The turning we want is coming up. Muttering under his breath, Maitland turned the car onto the slip road with seconds to spare. Seriously, Bern, there are people on the internet who want to kill us. Bernard was quite enjoying his colleague's distress. As soon as Maitland had got out of the car, he pulled his mobile out to check that Bernard wasn't winding him up about the tweets. Scrolling through them, he had sworn furiously under his breath as he took in the full range of hatred expressed for the Hets. Well, it would appear so, wouldn't it? Bernard turned to the receptionist. We've got a meeting arranged with Martine Galloway. The receptionist directed them to the seating area to wait. Maitland threw himself into the chair next to Bernard. Why aren't you more upset about this? What's happened to your usual Nancy boy tendencies? I'm cautious. I do not have Nancy boy tendencies. Maitland snorted. Anyway, said Bernard, this is all just internet noise. Twitter is full of 15-year-old boys pretending to be tough. And everyone's upset about the virus, so they're just mouthing off. But there are so many of them. All it would take is one of them to actually follow through on the tweet. Maitland, you need to... Excuse me, are you the people from the Het? The woman was standing in front of them. She was in her mid-40s with long hair with blonde highlights and was wearing the uniform of female office workers across the world. A black trouser suit. I'm Martine Galloway. I believe you're looking for me. Hi, I'm Bernard. He stuck out a hand. Maitland, we spoke on the phone. She pointed to the entrance. Do you mind if we discuss this outside? I'd rather get away from work before we start. They followed Martine out of the building into the weak autumn sunshine. She led them through the green space that surrounded the buildings, following a narrow path alongside an artificial lake. They passed a number of empty benches, but she kept going until she was some distance from her office before sitting down. So, said Bernard, when you spoke to my colleague on the phone, you said you met up with Miss Sopel quite recently. Well, not really recently. We met up a couple of days after my birthdays, so it must be, God, over a month ago now. You're good friends then? She gave a gentle laugh. I don't know. Do good friends see each other more often than every couple of months? We're old friends. We've known each other since we were at primary school, so we do try to keep in touch. Birthdays and Christmas. But I've got 2 little ones now, and Helen works all the hours God sends, so it's not easy. Maitland leaned across Bernard. Did Helen have a boyfriend? She looked away, staring out across the square expanse of water. Can you tell me again why you're asking all these questions about her? Maitland rested his pointy elbow on Bernard's leg while he explained that Miss Sopel had missed a health check, and gave her the necessary disclaimers. Bernard wondered if it would be considered unprofessional to push Maitland off the bench and into the flower bed. He settled for a gentle shove of Maitland's arm, which led Maitland to lean down harder. Are you absolutely sure that Helen missed a health check? Martine was looking increasingly upset. I can't believe she would have. That would be her career over. She put her hand over her eyes, and Bernard grasped the opportunity to shove Maitland and his pointy elbow off him. "We're really, really sure. I know it's upsetting, Miss Galloway, but there's absolutely nothing to say that your friend has come to harm." She must have done. Her tone was flat and resigned. That's the only way she'd have missed her check. "So," said Maitland, "did she have a boyfriend?" "Oh, God." She stood up. For a minute Bernard thought she was going to run back to her office, but she just paced back and forth. "It's an offence to withhold information that might be relevant to the retrieval of a health check defaulter," said Maitland. "I know that. Stop trying to bully me. I'm trying to think." Bernard looked over at Maitland, who winked at him. This woman knew something significant, and judging by her reaction to his question about Helen Sopel's love life, the horrible prospect loomed that Maitland might have been right all along. "We could discuss this further at our offices. Do you need to make some childcare arrangement? Because it might take a while." Maitland stood up as well. "I don't want to get into trouble." She looked at Bernard. "But I don't want to get anyone else into trouble either." Was Helen having an affair? After a moment's pause, she spoke softly. "I think so." "Can you give us her boyfriend's name?" She didn't answer, staring again in the direction of her office. "Right," Maitland took her by the arm. "You're going to have to come with us." "No," she shook her arm free. "I can't help you because I don't know his name." She sat down next to Bernard, focusing solely on him. "This is very difficult. Take your time." "Okay, right." She took a deep breath. "When I met up with Helen, she was really down about something. I thought she was seeing someone, so I asked her about him and how it was going. And she kind of got really angry, you know? At first I thought she was angry with me for asking. I mean, it was none of my business, but she's my oldest friend and I was worried about her." "Obviously. Anyone would be in that situation." "Yeah." After a minute or two, she calmed down and said she wasn't angry with me, but she was really fed up with someone she was involved with. Said she hated him, in fact, but that he was someone very well connected and she was afraid what might happen if she told him to get lost. "Well connected? What does that mean?" "I don't know, really. I didn't push it at the time. I mean, she works with politicians all the time, so I assumed it was someone from that kind of world. But she didn't tell you who it was?" "No," she shook her head. "I did ask, but she totally clammed up." "Well, thank you for sharing that with us. We'll look into it and we'll be back in touch." He stood up. "We'd better let you get back to work." To Bernard's surprise, she didn't move. Given her reluctance to speak to them, he thought she'd be back to her desk like a bullet from a gun. "There's something else." "Okay." He lowered himself back down. "Helen phoned me the next day, apologising for being so grumpy. Of course, I told her to forget it, what are old friends for and all that. Then she said she needed a favour. She said she wanted to give me a box of things to look after. She said it was her insurance policy, and if she ever got into trouble, she'd phone me and tell me what to do with it." "But she's not been in touch." "No, but she was obviously worried that something was going to happen to her, and I think," she started to cry, "maybe something has." She buried her head in her hands and wept. Bernard put a comforting arm round her shoulders, and she leaned her head against him. Over the top of it, he could see Maitland shimmying from side to side in a victory dance. Maitland smiled at him and punched the air. For the first time in his life, Bernard found himself sharing an emotion with an internet troll. He could kill Maitland. Chapter 5. There was a young police officer standing guard at the entrance to Jasper Connington's block of flats. "Stop here." Ian tapped the dashboard. "I'll see what the plod's got to say about things, while you find somewhere to dump the motor." Mona waited until the second the car door was shut, then drove off at speed, hoping that Ian would take the hint. She was nobody's chauffeur, nobody's dog's body, just there to park the car and get the bacon rolls in. She was starting to pine for her investigations with Bernard. When she worked with him, she got to boss him around, and he was grateful for the direction. This supposed joint investigation by CID and the Het didn't feel like a partnership. It felt more like CID investigating and the Het providing transport, office space, and the occasional cup of coffee. By the time she found a parking space, Ian had completed his interrogation of the PC and was waiting impatiently for her on the pavement. He gestured in the direction of the cop. He says the ambulance has been and picked up the body. There was a suicide note which someone is going to scan and send us, but apparently all it said was, "Sorry" and "I love you." So no great revelations there. And he says he's been warding off journalists all morning, though most of them have buggered off once the body was picked up. Not surprising, I suppose, given that it's such a secret and it's been on the BBC website. Though I don't understand how it's made the news so quickly. Who told them? He shrugged. Who knows who Connington's partner phoned when he found the body? One of his so-called friends could have been straight on to the press. Or he could have phoned them himself. I doubt it was a leak. Not like someone from the Het shouting their mouth off about the meeting at the museum. Fury engulfed her. That was nothing to do with the Het. You sure about that? Couldn't have been the disaffected staff member who's desperate to resign, or the one who's too young and self-absorbed to know any better, or the one who's so naive he'd tell anyone anything if they ask nicely. No. He smiled, a lazy, infuriating grin. "Oh, well, must have been you then." "Oh, fuck off." She stormed into the building with a cursory nod at the PC, who shot her a nervous smile in return. As she marched up the stone stairs, she tried to get her temper under control, mindful that in a few seconds' time she'd have to face the poor man who'd just lost his partner. Jasper Connington's husband was slumped on his sofa. "We're sorry for your loss, Mr. Keaton." He was red-eyed and blank. Mona was pretty sure he was in shock. Fortunately, he wasn't on his own. A woman in her 60s was next to him, a protective arm draped around his shoulder. "And, miss, can I ask who you are?" "I'm Joyce Miller, Colin and Jasper's next-door neighbour. At least..." The unspoken past tense hung in the air. Colin Keaton rubbed at his forehead, his fingers going back and forth, as his eyes fixed on a distant point across the room. Mona wondered if the paramedics had given him the once-over. "Mr. Keaton, could you tell us what happened this morning?" He took a deep breath. For a moment, Mona thought he wasn't going to speak, but he rallied and began. "I was working all night. I'm a theatre nurse. We had a bad night of it dealing with an RTA. A young driver with head injuries was brought in about 2 a.m. We worked on him for about 4 hours, but in the end it was no good. He'd taken too much of a hit." He stopped and rubbed his forehead again. "It was after 8 when I got in, so I was surprised to see Jasp still in bed. I thought he'd be long gone. Usually tries to get into the office by 7:30 at the latest. I thought he was ill, but when I went in," his voice faltered, "I could see vomit on his front." "Do you have to ask all this right now?" Joyce's tone was belligerent, which Mona thought was probably partly a cover for her grief. "Sorry, ma'am, but we do. Mr. Keaton, was Mr. Connington still breathing when you found him?" "He was cold." His voice was flat. "I screamed and Joyce came to see what was going on." "I'm sorry, Mr. Keaton. I understand this must be very distressing to talk about. Is there any chance that Mr. Connington's overdose was accidental?" "Accidental?" For the first time since they'd arrived, Colin Keaton looked directly at her. "Jaspers was a nurse before he joined the civil service. He knew exactly what he was doing. He must have taken the tablets as soon as I left for work. He wasn't taking any chances on being found. He knew he'd be dead by the time I found him." "Surely you've asked enough questions now." Joyce looked ready to punch someone, and Mona couldn't blame her. She must have had the shock of her life this morning. "I'm sorry, just a couple more. The pills that Mr. Connington took, what were they?" "Antidepressants. They were on prescription." "Had he been taking them long?" "I didn't know that he was on them. He didn't tell me." "But you knew he was depressed?" "I don't know, maybe, I suppose. I knew he was worrying about work, but I couldn't get him to talk to me about it. I should have tried harder." He started rubbing his forehead again. "I don't understand. I don't understand any of this." The phone rang. "That may be a journalist," said Ian. Yes, said Joyce. The bastards have been phoning all morning. Mona pitied the journalist that got Joyce on the other end of the phone. How do they even have our number? Asked Colin. We're ex-directory because of Jasp's job. Mona reckoned it would take any hack worth his salt 5 minutes tops to locate an ex-directory number. Journalists have their ways, Mr. Keaton. But how do they even know about Jasp's death? The only people Joyce and I spoke to were the ambulance service. Who told the press? That was a question she couldn't answer. That was odd. Ian was absent-mindedly tapping the dashboard, which was putting her off driving. What was? And please stop doing that. Sorry, he grinned, not altogether apologetically. The antidepressant thing. If my wife was on them, I'd know about it. People who are depressed can be secretive, you know. Put on a brave face. For a man in his job, there's probably a lot of stigma to saying you can't cope with the stress of work. I mean, he was pretty near the top of the tree when it came to virus stuff. He must have been under a ridiculous amount of pressure. True, not sure I could have done his job, but we only have Keaton's word for it that the depression was related to the job. Maybe it was something closer to home. Maybe he was unhappy in his marriage, or was having an affair and couldn't cope with the guilt. Possibly. Guilt does drive people crazy. But I'm still finding it a bit too much of a coincidence that he topped himself so soon after Nathan McVie jumped, and Helen Sopel went missing. I'd love to know what went on at that meeting at the museum. Well, there is someone we can ask. Carlotta Carmichael. We'd better speak to Stuttle. Chapter 6. I wonder what's in the package that Martine Galloway has for safekeeping, said Bernard. Maybe it's a semen-stained dress like Clinton. Yuck. Maitland's expression moved from disgust to confusion. Why would Hillary Clinton have a semen-stained dress? Not Hillary, Bill! Maitland's face did not look any less confused by this explanation. How old are you, Maitland? 24, Bernard sighed. Never mind, it's all ancient history to you. Anyway, we'll know when Miss Galloway drops off the stuff. Although, if there are any dresses in there, you can be in charge of examining them. We're nearly there. Is this turning? Maitland sighed. Well, the trip to see Miss Galloway turned out to be a lot more interesting than I expected, but I'm pretty sure this is going to be as dull as... Maitland, a visit to the Plague Museum is never, ever dull. You really are a sad little man. The Edinburgh Museum of Plagues and Pandemics occupied a full 3-storey townhouse in Edinburgh's New Town. It was rare to encounter a townhouse that hadn't been subdivided, and rarer still to find one which had been in the same hands since 1863. The Plague Museum, as everyone called it, had been established by a hefty donation from Archibald Cunningham, Esquire, a childless chemist. His will, much to the annoyance of his many cousins, had left his entire estate to the establishment of a museum focusing solely on infectious diseases. After a brief sojourn on Leith Street, the museum had moved to its current premises in the New Town, and with the exception of the interruption of a couple of world wars, had remained open ever since. Bernard followed Maitland up the broad stone steps, which were lined on each side by a row of pot plants. I love this place, he said happily. I know, you're a member, you said. It's the attention to detail that I love. I mean, these plants, for example, they're not just any old pot plants, they're plague pot plants. Maitland put his hands together as if he was praying. Please, God, don't let Bernard launch into a long explanation of the significance of the potted plant in tackling the plague. Bernard was an atheist. Can you smell the lovely fragrance coming off them? Back in the 17th century, people thought the plague was caused by a miasma of bad air. People started carrying around plague bags filled with herbs and sweet-scented plants because they thought it would protect them. Is that nursery rhyme not supposed to be about the plague? Pocket full of posies and we all fall down, that one? Actually, that's an urban myth. Oh, Maitland looked almost disappointed. Thought I knew a Bernard-type fact there. Anyway, The only plants I'm interested in are the ones that can be harvested, dried and smoked. Maitland! Bernard was horrified. You're a former policeman. You can't advocate the smoking of illegal drugs. He grinned. Even the police don't ban tobacco. What drugs were you thinking about, you badass? Bernard remained silent. Shall we go in? Badass. Sharp. He pushed the front door. Oh, it's locked. Maitland pointed to a sign entitled Opening Hours. They close at 3 on a Tuesday. I phoned ahead, though. There should be someone here. He pressed the ornate Georgian bell, and a deep dong sounded somewhere in the heart of the building. After a second or two's delay, the door opened a crack, and a female face peered nervously out. Are you the gentleman from the health enforcement team? Yes, we're here to see Karina McFarlane. The door opened a little further. She's not here. Maitland slowly but firmly pushed the door open and stepped into the entrance hall. Bernard followed him. It was a tight fit due to a pile of brown cardboard boxes that stood as tall as he was. He looked at the labels on them. Ebola, yellow fever, Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever. With a shudder, he stepped as far into the room as possible. What do you mean she's not here? Maitland scowled. My colleague phoned ahead to arrange a time that was suitable to meet with her. Bernard looked at the woman. She was 30-ish, with long, lank hair and an unfortunately large nose. She was looking extremely uncomfortable at Maitland's questioning. Yes, I know, but something came up and she had to go out and she asked me to help you and... She paused for breath. I'm Lucy, by the way. She stuck out her hand. Bernard shook it. It was warm and moist to the touch. The assistant curator? Maitland also shook Lucy's hand, then rubbed his palm less than discreetly on his trousers. Well, you'll have to do, but tell your boss we're not impressed about her absence. Hindering the search for a health defaulter is a criminal offence, you know. Lucy's eyes almost popped out of her head. I'm sure Karina isn't... She stopped, confused. Who's Mr. Health Check? Not Karina. No, we don't need to go into all of that. Bernard glared at Maitland, who was throwing his weight around rather more than Bernard thought was necessary. It can wait until we catch up with Miss McFarlane. But there is something you could do to help us. Could we have sight of your meeting room booking diary? Or your online calendar, or whatever it is you use? Oh, I can do that. She ducked behind the reception desk, reappearing with a large leather-bound book. It's paper, I'm afraid. Some of our older volunteers are quite resistant to technology. She dropped it onto the counter, where it landed with a thud that echoed around the room. Maitland immediately started flicking through it. Bernard caught Lucy's eye. She smiled back, a full and, he thought, guileless smile, which made her look quite pretty. Is it a particular meeting you're looking for? As she stepped toward Maitland, Bernard took the opportunity to shoot a glance at her ring finger, which was gratifyingly bare. We're looking to see how often there was a meeting of a group of civil servants in your premises. Do you mean the meetings organised by Nathan McPhee? Her face clouded over. Poor Nathan. You knew him? Only through Karina. He's an old university pal of hers. Nathan came to all the fundraisers that we held for the museum, and I used to chat to him. He was a lovely man. And of course I sometimes met him when he came here for meetings. So he was Karina's friend, said Maitland. Boyfriend, or just a good friend? Friend, she said firmly. Maitland returned to leafing through the bookings journal. I'm not finding any Scottish Government meetings here. Really? She gently eased the book back out of Maitland's hands. Oh, I see the problem here. Karina's been a bit lax noting who was meeting here. See? She pointed at an example. Wherever she's booked the room, she's just written Karina instead of saying who the meeting was for, which will make it very difficult for us to know how many sessions to charge them for. You charge the Scottish Government for using the room? I assume so. We charge everyone else who books them. Karina deals with all the finance stuff, so you'd really have to ask her. We're a small museum and every penny counts, although... What? Well, I hope I'm not talking out of turn, but I get the impression that we don't seem so badly off financially this year. I've been here coming up for 5 years, and a big part of my role has been organising fundraisers, after-hours events or membership drives. But Karina hasn't even asked me to apply for any grant funding this year, never mind organise fundraisers. But we'd have to ask Karina about that. Yes, absolutely. OK, one last thing. Seeing as the book can't tell us, could you estimate how frequently the civil servants met here? Maybe every couple of weeks for the last 6 months? But they usually met in the evening, so I only saw them if I was still at work. Well, thank you, Lucy, for your assistance, said Bernard. Such as it was, muttered Maitland. Lucy's smile faltered. I'm sorry that your journey wasn't more useful. Can I offer you a tour of the museum to make up for it? What have you got in there? Asked Maitland. Any two-headed dogs or anything like that? She looked confused. We're an infectious diseases museum. Why would we have a two-headed dog? So, no deformed animals of any kind, then? Please ignore my colleague, Bernard stepped in. He's a Philistine. He's confusing the concept of a museum with that of a freak show. I'm actually a member of the museum. Are you? She beamed. Her smile really did make a huge difference to her looks. Would you like the full behind-the-scenes view? I'd love to. Maitland coughed noisily. Bernard sighed. But I'd better get back to the office. Maybe some other time then, when you're not so busy. I'd like that. Take my card, just in case, your boss wants to contact us or anything like that. Or if you have any questions. Anything at all, in fact. Tell your boss we will be back to see her, said Maitland sternly. Bernard smiled to himself as they exited the museum, retracing their steps past the sweet-smelling plants. I saw that, said Maitland. Saw what, exactly? You slipping Lucy your business card. That was legitimate het, and seeing as she's got a big nose and a bad hairdo, you might even be in with a chance. Shut up. He felt irrationally annoyed at Maitland's comments. I did not slip her my business card. It was a work thing. Whatever, badass. The steps that led up to their office were blocked by the large, unmovable shape of Marguerite. Marguerite was by far the most outgoing of the team of admin assistants that the Het shared with the other departments in their building, although outgoing was only one way of describing her personality. Loud might be another, or perhaps opinionated. She tended to hold forth on a narrow range of subjects, including soap operas, pop music, hairstyles, makeup, nail art, ineffective diets, and the best place in Edinburgh to get cheaply and efficiently drunk on a Saturday night. Suffice to say, Bernard had not yet encountered much common ground with her. Well, you pair made it back just in the nick of time. What? Maitland ground to a halt. Another 5 minutes and I'd have been out here. Kev's got us tickets to the cinema tonight, and you know what he said last time I turned up late. Marguerite, began Bernard, hoping to head off one of Marguerite's very long tales about her boyfriend's shortcomings. He said if he'd had to wait for me to turn up late again, he was going in and I could pay for myself. Get that? Pay for myself? OK, but we're kind of busy. So I was planning to leave here at 4:30 p.m. so that I could get home, have a bath and do my Hi! Maitland had had enough listening to Marguerite's plans for the evening and shoved her out of the way. She tutted and manoeuvred herself more firmly in the way of Bernard. Please, let me past. I can't. I've got a parcel for you. Maitland ran backwards down the steps until he was level with her. From Martine Galloway? Yes, and she made me promise I would deliver it personally into your hands. I said she could wait if she wanted, but she was a bit, nervous or something, and she said she'd just leave it with me. Made me give her a receipt and everything. So that's why I'm still at work instead of halfway through a nice, relaxing bath. Maitland threw an arm around her shoulder and kissed her noisily on the cheek. Marge, that Kev doesn't know how lucky he is. You are truly an angel fallen to earth. Tell that to Kev when I'm late. Anyway, the parcel's hidden under your desk. Maitland took the stairs 2 at a time, keen not to miss out. Bernard ran after him. Thanks, Marguerite, he called over his shoulder. Have some popcorn on us. So what is all this crap? Maitland had unloaded the contents of the box onto his desk, none of which, thankfully, were items of clothing with traces of the DNA of Helen Sopel's mystery boyfriend. The 3 items in the box had been set out across Bernard's desk. On the left-hand side, there were several pages of itemised calls relating to a Virgin Mobile. Someone had gone through the phone bills and highlighted a particular recurring number with a fluorescent pink pen. In the centre of the desk, resting lightly on the computer's keyboard, was a face mask, which looked to Bernard like some kind of Native American folk art. It was painted black on one side and a powdery white on the other, and the mouth of the mask was distorted to one side. When Bernard picked it up, he was surprised at how light it was. He'd guessed it was reproduction rather than the real thing. On the far right, there lay a black and white photocopy of a photograph of a woman. She was wearing a full-skirted, knee-length dress, decorated with a floral print. This was topped off with a short, boxy jacket and a hat. Her fashion sense placed the picture firmly in the 1950s. I don't know what it all means, Maitland, but I still think we should have waited until Mr. Patterson was here before we opened this up. And shouldn't we be wearing gloves or something, not getting our fingerprints all over it? Relax, this is the Het, not a CID investigation. But I thought this was a joint investigation with Police Scotland. Maitland stopped flicking through the papers. Oh, I suppose it is. He pulled his jumper over the end of his fingers and continued flicking. But finding Helen Sopel's important. We can't wait for the Gov or that Ian bloke to personally OK our every move. But shut up and look at this. These bills are all for Helen Sopel's phone, and she's highlighted the same number over and over. Do you reckon this is Loverboy's mobile? In spite of his misgivings, Bernard focused in on the paperwork. It could be, couldn't it? We should probably ask Mr. Patterson what to do with it. Yeah, but he's not here, is he? And we could be wasting valuable time sitting on our hands, waiting for a grown-up to come along and say it's okay for us to play with our toys. I say we seize the day. Oh, I really don't know about this. Stop being such a wuss. I'm phoning it. Bernard opened his mouth to protest further, and for want of a half-decent argument, closed it again. Maitland was right that they were wasting time, and if he was completely honest with himself, he was dying to know who Helen Sopel had deemed important enough to highlight to her best friend in an open in an emergency package. Maitland grinned at him, then punched the number into his phone. His expression froze, and he ended the call, dropping his phone onto his desk as if it was on fire. Shit, Bernie, we are so screwed. Chapter 7. Stuttle was wearing a very sharp suit and appeared to have spent the last hour bathing in aftershave, if the smell permeating his office was anything to go by. Mona had to try very hard not to cough every time a whiff of it wafted in her direction. Stuttle sat behind his huge mahogany desk with an expression that suggested he was very annoyed to have his evening interrupted by the North Edinburgh Het. On the other side of the desk were Patterson, Mona, Ian and Bernard, with expressions that ranged from mild exasperation to heightened fearfulness. So the gang's all here then. Where's the one that's threatening to sue me? Carol, said Patterson. She left the Het on the dot of 5 o'clock and persuaded Maitland that he should do the same. She's not a very good influence on that lad at the moment. All very interesting, but can you cut to the chase of why you all absolutely had to see me? I've got 20 minutes until I'm due at the Sheraton for a charity event. Mona turned to look at Bernard. She knew he'd be intrigued by this, as he was a strong supporter of charity. He'd be desperate to know which particular charitable endeavour Stuttle was a supporter of. But at the same time, his fear of the Shep boss was strong. Would curiosity or nerves win? Bernard's mouth opened. Which one? What? Which charity? I don't know, Bernard. He waved a sheet of paper at them. I've not even had time to read the briefing notes yet. All I know is that I want to be there sharp at 7. Eat whatever overcooked, mass-produced hotel food I'm offered, see how strongly Shep supports whatever charitable endeavour I'm actually at, then get home to Mrs. Stuttle. So, whatever supposed crisis involves all four of you being in my office, can you make your ask? I'll say no, then we can all get on our way. Ian smiled. I'll go first, shall I? There were 4 people at the meeting at the museum. 2 are dead, and 1 is missing. And you want to talk to Carlotta Carmichael? Well, you can't. She's currently on a fact-finding mission to Tallinn, Estonia, in the company of a range of health service staff, several trade and industry bods, and her ever-loving husband, Jonathan. Patterson looked curious. Do you memorise her calendar so that you know where she is at any given time? Stuttle snorted. In my position, wouldn't you? Anyway, she's back tomorrow. I'll get something sorted. Shouldn't be a problem as we have a legitimate reason. What do you want to get out of the meeting with her? We want to know what they talked about in their unminuted meeting. Yes, you and me and the whole of Twitter wants to know that, but I wouldn't bank on her telling you anything. There's always a danger that she turns up with her lawyer as well, who I think she's gotten bloody speed dialed, by the way, but I trust you guys not to mess it up. OK, who's next? Everyone turned to look at Bernard. Right, OK. Clock is ticking, Bernard. The sick children / animals / historic buildings are waiting. OK, right. Helen Sopel's best friend thought that she was having an affair and was worried about this. She left a package with her friend in case anything bad happened. He looked intrigued. Like Monica Lewinsky and her dress. Exactly like that. In that package was a selection of Miss Sopel's phone bills, all with the same number highlighted. The boyfriend's number. We assumed so we phoned it and... The room was suddenly very silent. Jonathan Carmichael answered. Stuttle stared at him. Without taking his eyes off Bernard's face, he reached over and picked up his phone. Catherine, can you put in my apologies for that charity thing? Something's come up.
End of CD 3.